Board of Trustees work session for April 18th. We'll start off with the off-highway vehicle discussion with Ali Shelley presenting.
Good evening, Mayor and Board of Trustees. It's good to be back. It's been a while. I'm going to talk to you guys tonight about off-highway vehicles. This was a discussion point that got brought up last fall by a couple of trustees, just some interest in what it would look like. One second, I'm going to promote Trustee Daly real quick. I'm kind of doing both things. Okay, perfect. She should be able to get on. So as a discussion point from a couple of trustees, conversation about golf carts specifically. We have a pretty small town, so the thought of golf carts on our roadways is just a discussion point that the board was interested in exploring further. So this is my initial research I put together for this discussion. Of course, depending on how this discussion goes, I'm happy to go into more research, more detail about specific topic points. But this is really just a chance for us to have a starting point. I've spoken with LCSO, specifically Sergeant Cherry, about some concerns, just things to consider if we are to move forward with something like this. And I would add more partners into that conversation if this is something we want to explore further. I also have talked with our engineering department since they maintain our roads, and they have given us some feedback as well. So you see all that information reflected in the memo tonight. There are about 4 different items I want to specifically talk about, and then I'll open it up for questions and discussion among the board. So first and foremost, the general concept is that Governor Polis in 2021 eliminated the legalization of golf carts on any state highways, roads, all of that, basically putting the power in the hands of the local jurisdictions to determine the rules and regulations of their roadways. So any state highway that you find in the state of Colorado would have to have a special exemption in order for a golf cart or an off-highway vehicle to operate on that surface. It is important also to note that off-highway vehicles and golf carts are different things. So if we were to pursue something, we'd need to specifically outline the difference in vehicle type. But the general concept is that certain jurisdictions have legalized the operation of these vehicles on their roads, and some have chosen not to. It depends. Every community is different. So tonight there are a couple of things I would love to discuss about it. First and foremost is the registration process. So in terms of off-highway vehicles, they have a registration process through the Colorado Parks and Wildlife. That is a database that Larimer County Sheriff's Office could have access to, not specifically, but they could reach out for access. There would be some logistic issues if they were to pull over an off-highway vehicle. Sergeant Cherry wouldn't be able to just like pull up the database to determine registration. He would have to send in an inquiry to the state in order to receive the registration from them. But if there is a desire for golf cart specifically, there's not a set registration process in place. So that would be something that would need to fall within the town. That would look like us collecting the title paperwork that they receive when they purchase the vehicle. Insurance. When we spoke with the LCSO, it was really important to them that there be insurance in this registration process. Obviously, if there's an accident, we want to make sure that people are insured. So that would fall within the jurisdiction of the town. It would be something that the town would need to take on and specifically have constant contact with our law enforcement office if there was a case in which a vehicle got pulled over. Additionally, another thing to consider is signage and enforcement. If you look at page 12 in your packet, there is a map of ownership of our roads in the town of Wellington. Our roads are owned by the town of Wellington, they're owned by the county, they're owned by the state, and a lot of times they transition that maintenance and ownership in a very random spot in the road. There's not like an intersection or something that can really be defined. So one of our biggest concerns that we discussed specifically was the concept of signage and where to allow the carts to operate and where not to if the road transitions halfway down the street. We obviously don't want people U-turning on a really busy public road that could cause significant traffic issues, safety issues. Our roads aren't, quite frankly, designed for that. Our roads are designed under an engineering standard that is specific to cars and trucks and semi trucks. they're not operating or they're not designed for golf carts specifically. So that's something we need to consider, and signage specifically would have to be pretty outlined. For example, if we were looking at like County Road 9, that's obviously owned by the county. Eventually that may fall in the jurisdiction of the town at certain places, but there would have to be really specific signage of when that would transition jurisdiction, because we cannot legalize the operation of the vehicle in county jurisdictions. Additionally, there's just concern, something we need to consider is just the reduced speeds of these vehicles. We have a lot of thoroughways, a lot of really busy streets that run through. I specifically am thinking about like 3rd Street, 6th Street, County Road 9, Highway 1. A lot of those roads have pretty fast traffic, and any operation of these types of vehicles would definitely inhibit the ability for traffic to flow as it's intended. So there need to be a conversation about maybe time of day, or even just not allowing them on those roads specifically, maybe just localized smaller roadways specifically. Something that was brought up by Trustee Teets that I really wanted to highlight is while these vehicles are not allowed to operate on state highways, there are instances in the state of Colorado in which the Colorado Department of Transportation has allowed an exemption in that effect. So specifically the Alpine Scenic Highway in Hinsdale County has they're in their 3rd year of a pilot program in which they are allowing those types of off-highway vehicles on their roadways. The scenic highway is pretty in the mountains. There's a lot of that type of traffic up there. So it made sense for the Department of Transportation to allow that pilot program. If that is something that the board would like to consider to allow the operation of the vehicles on, let's say, Highway 1, that would be something that the town would have to put together a presentation, go through that commission process, present to the commission, and get granted a pilot program of that effect. That's a process that the town staff would have to take in order for that to happen. There are also other options in terms of allowing these vehicles at certain times. So for example, special events. I know a lot, like some of our commissions and our volunteers have used golf carts during special events like 4th of July. The town of Parker, if you look in your packet, there's an example of their application for an exemption permit for the day of the event. It basically allows the operation of those vehicles on designated roadways for the event specifically, and that just provides additional regulation in terms of safety and compliance and in that effect. So those are the main points I wanted to just bring up to start the conversation, but I'm happy to take requests and discussion and questions.
I know you have it for ATVs, UTVs, golf carts. Can we just limit it to like UTVs?
You can restrict it to specific vehicles. It really is up to the board how specific you want to get into it, or how broad you want to make that discussion.
Yeah, I know I've been over to Vernal, Utah, and a few of those places, and I think just mainly UTVs are allowed. Is that right? Or
Like side by sides.
Yeah,
I think
Yeah.
golf carts, I've seen them cruising around there too. Yep.
But, I mean, we're looking at a pretty large undertaking to be able to do something like this through the town, cost wise. How much is signage per se, like ballpark?
$20,000 to start.
I'd say, yeah, that feels pretty fair. I mean, the sign, we can make a lot of the signage in-house. We have done that in the past, but I would say that it would be a significant undertaking. I think primarily the biggest cost in something like this would be staff time, not just the initial legalization process or the ability, it's the keeping the registration and maintaining the records at a constant basis. That would have to be a designated job duty for someone in the town.
Have we adopted the model traffic code?
Yes.
So what would those impacts be on something like this?
All of these vehicles would fall under the model traffic code, similar.
Would that mean they need blinkers and seat belts and headlights and
Yep.
plates? So it's not just being able to pull something out on the street and
There are standards within the off-highway vehicles specifically under the state regulations, and then additionally, like Lyons that has legalized golf carts specifically in their jurisdiction, they have additional, like, very similar regulations for those specifically, since they're not outlined in the state legislation.
So out of curiosity, like how many of these communities that have adopted these types of things have large open spaces or recreation opportunities tied to these types of trails?
I would say my ballpark estimation is 80 to 90% of them would have an ATV tourism attraction or that type of off-roading atmosphere, that they receive tourism and general populations because of that specifically in their area.
So where is the closest like park or open space where somebody can use a recreation vehicle like that? So
That's a great
if we wanted
question.
to connect a trail so that it would make sense,
Mhm.
so that it models other communities that have made something like this work, what kind of extensive trail system would we be looking at?
That is a great question. I do not have an answer for tonight. I definitely can look into the closest.
It's definitely not Red Mountain or
Closest.
Soapstone, it would be Red Feather, probably.
It's
Hmm.
probably Red Feather, the closest probably, I don't know, 7 miles, somewhere right around there,
That sounds about right.
which is 45 minutes away.
So in these types of communities are intended to be connections to open space where they can recreate for tourism.
Yes.
Or the golf carts, or if there's a golf course
Oh,
nearby.
Right, like in the
Yeah.
neighborhood,
Mhm.
like in Windsor.
Yeah,
Yes,
Yeah.
it's all over in Windsor. I've been out there a
Yeah.
lot for work.
Yeah, there's-
But it is like within that neighborhood, you're free to, drive the golf cart around. There might be a few of them that, I don't know if there is a golf course or not, but when you get to the end of the neighborhood, there is a sign that says you're not allowed to take your golf cart down
Right.
here. So that could be an option to follow as well. If we wanted to do something like that, but yeah, we don't have golf courses. I don't know if there's a desire for people just to drive them around the neighborhood. I know
There is.
I've been with Sergeant Cherry on a ride along once, stop with the gentleman who had the bike going and off and out in some of the dirt area, but again, can't be driving that on the town roads, so.
Right.
So I know as far as education and information I have on this subject, I am completely in support of exploring this further. I think it's an awesome idea. I think it helps people navigate down to our downtown area without creating massive traffic and parking issues, since parking seems to be an issue in our downtown in general. But at the same time, so our ATV that we actually have is fully street legal and licensed with a license plate. So you can get a license. We pay for our tags every year, like we pay for our regular tags for our vehicle. I know that when I was looking, I liked a lot of some of the stuff that was introduced in here by some of the other municipalities. The windshield, safety glasses, stuff like that to utilize as far as safety goes. But I know in general that I know more than a handful of people that would love to have something like this available in this area. So whether it's golf courts, golf carts, or side-by-sides, motorcycles, I haven't heard that much, because even if you still have the age restriction of having to have a driver's license. So you would still have to have a vehicle that complied with all of the rules and regulations of the model traffic code. So that's definitely understandable. I have seen kids scooting around many of times on little motorbikes and everything around downtown, and probably not being the safest as possible. But so as far as I go, I'm totally open to exploring this more. Realizing that this might be something that's explored and discussed through this year and maybe implemented as part of a budget item for this following year or the year after. But I think it's something that would be awesome for this area in general. And if we do end up expanding further out, that would be awesome if we could include some kind of rec area. I know when Blade Reservoir does come into fruition, they do have an off-road area planned in that area. I've seen the recreational part that they have set out. And that's gonna be maybe a 10 to 15-minute jaunt from here. So that's also something to keep in mind when we move forward with this, because if we can attract tourism here and people stay at the hotels here, it might not be that bad of a thing.
Question, so I know you mentioned it would help with the parking. I don't own an ATV, I've never owned an ATV. How would that work more? Would we be able to fit more of those into parking? I don't know.
I mean, not necessarily, depends on the size.
Yeah.
And they're
depends on
smaller,
the
but
size.
would you be able to fit more than one in a parking
You
spot
would maybe,
though? Or
you could potentially fit 2 to 4 in parking spaces, depending on, if it's golf cart, probably 4.
Oh, okay.
If it's side by side, probably 2, depending on the size of the side by side.
Oh, okay. So we
So
could,
side by side would be 1 for sure.
Yeah, definitely depends on the setup.
okay. Got it. Okay.
Trustee Kinney is also raising her hand online.
Yeah, go ahead, trustee Daly.
Okay, a couple things. I remember when we were having our Highway 1, County Road 9 conversations, the question came up from some concerned parents, why don't we just reduce the speed limit? It seems like it would make so much sense, if the fast cars were a concern, we should just lower the speed limit. And then the conversation came back was the reason why speed limit studies are so important is that regardless of what the speed limit is, people will drive a certain speed. So therefore, if they were to set a speed limit at a lower speed, it will actually endanger more people because some people will abide by the speed limit and go considerably slower, while meanwhile, other people will drive as fast as they're going to drive. And those slower vehicles will be at a significant risk. So I think the risk that we're talking about some vehicles going significantly slower than others is an extreme liability. And I think that is us knowingly putting people at risk. And with that said, I think that that's the liability of the town, us knowing that's a concern. So for those roadways that have higher speed limits, where a lot of these vehicles top out, don't even go those speeds, that their top speed that they could even potentially reach isn't even at that speed limit, which is the majority of these vehicles. That's knowingly putting them in a dangerous situation. So that brings up the scenario where there's several roads within our town limits that are knowingly dangerous areas. So then we have the situation where we're limiting which roads can and cannot, which ones are county, which ones are state, which ones are this and that, where we're having to police potentially through the signage, through LCSO, potentially the use of these vehicles. I don't think we're setting ourselves up for success, to be completely honest. And therefore, I don't think that this is a great choice to move forward with the conditions as they are. So I wanted to put that out there first. Secondly, I know that we are potentially, and I hope going to be undergoing a significant strategic plan for trails and recreation. I mean, if there is a priority within this board to ensure that, these type of vehicles are accommodated through our new trail system, and that's a priority, maybe that can be a consideration for our trails plan moving forward. And this would be a great opportunity when we're on the just starting a potential new strategic plan for trails to include this within that planning. So therefore, these off-road vehicles would be accommodated for trails. And then, those plans of connecting trails and maybe potentially up to Soapstone. I think that would be closer personally. I don't know if that allows these type of vehicles. That would be accommodated from a trail system perspective. There have been some significant risks that have been mentioned and costs. And from a safety perspective, logistics, I don't see this as viable right now, especially and cost perspective. I do not think that we should pursue this within our current scope. I mean, I would love to hear from the public, of course, but I think we have some other opportunities to pursue potentially from our trails plan.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for those comments. I would say I completely agree with everything you just said for the most part. I mean, side by sides definitely can get up to speed, but golf carts can't. But I think doing something potentially with the trails to allow golf carts would be great. Probably not side by side, just due to their capability when they're full throttle. I mean, yeah, cost wise, I don't think it really makes sense right now, and with all the roads liability wise. I don't know, I personally think that maybe pursuing some with trails for golf carts. Or maybe like a special day permit for golf carts kind of deal for the 4th of July or something along those lines. I think it'd be too much of a taxing. On LCSO for enforcement and trying to track these people down, getting calls of kids under the age of, because when we legalize something like this, there's gonna be kids out there that are under 16 that don't have a driver's license, where parents are like, oh, we'll just take the golf cart, and that's never gonna turn out great. They're kids, they're gonna do fun, stupid stuff. So that's where I'm at.
And certainly I share the mayor as well as trustee Daly's concerns. I mean, certainly as far as, general safety concerns and that sort of thing. I think, one of the big issues we would have is certainly trying to figure out how OHVs are going to get from the one side of I-25 to the other. I presume that would be the pedestrian underpass. I don't know how safe that is in general, but obviously with the signage costs and the staffing as far as OHV registration and these types of things, certainly we would want registration fees to make sure that that's paying for staffing as well as the signage costs and that sort of thing. But and then one of the other concerns I would have would, of course, be noise. I would figure we would probably want to limit these if we were going to do something like this to certain hours, something like, can't be writing it off after 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock or whatever that may be. But I have been considering this over the last number of months. I've talked to a number of different residents about it. And when I first considered it, I was like, oh, holy smokes, this sounds really cool. Really love to do it. But the more that I think about it, I don't know. I definitely have concerns.
The concerns that I would have would primarily be, trustee Mason brought up one concern of, a lot of the places I've seen, a lot of that more of the off-road type is on the east side of the freeway. And if we're trying to find a way to get people into downtown, which I think is a great idea, especially if we can help with parking, I think that's awesome. But then it's like, well, how are we going to get them there? Because we've already talked about that bridge is a nightmare over I-25. So obviously having them go, and it's a state highway. So it's just a bad plan to do it through there. So then do we have another way to get them there? That's a concern. The other area of concern would be, what is it going to be on us to regulate this? Are we going to have to hire a new staff position just to handle registration on this? And I mean, we're not going to, I could be wrong. I don't think that we would bring in enough revenue through that to, I could be wrong, but to pay for that position. So there's a cost there. That being said, I mean, it is something I'm not opposed to exploring the idea. I'm not opposed to putting some more into that to see, does it make more sense to tie it into trails? Does it make sense to look at another option to get people from the east side to the west side? Because that is one of the things we hear from people all the time. If we can, we talk about wanting to get more people in downtown, have more vibrant. I mean, if this is a tool to help us do that, if we can find a way to make it work, I think it's a great idea. So I have some concern with it, but I'm open to exploring the idea.
I'm definitely open to exploring the ideas. I think it's probably going to have to be a little bit more of a long range thing. We definitely need to be looking at what's going to be happening out at Blade and some of the different things and seeing if the need is as much as what we want it to be to have it here. Because it's going to have, it's going to have a significant cost to it, and just like expansion of the building in town and everything else, it needs to pay its own way also, I would think. So through registration, whatever, I don't know if we can actually, probably would have to have some type of licensing for anybody that's driving in the city. And again, that's more cost for the city too. So, but I think we probably should explore it. We should not just kill it completely. And maybe put it out to the citizens of our town, see how much demand there is out there. And from that, let's take it from there. I think we gotta explore it.
Holly, the only thing I didn't see was what the cost was for these towns that do implement the registrations. Do you know how much they charge?
Oh, the registration fee? I can get that number for the board for sure. I think it varies among communities. If a community, for example, like in Hinsdale County, if they receive a lot of tourism benefit from it, they're receiving that income in a different way. So the registration is going to reflect different costs than if it is non-tourism related. So I can get kind of a range of few examples for that.
Then you gotta figure with the delay, that's gonna bring some tourism to this town. But that's gonna be a few years off right now, I believe, at the quickest. So, like I said, I don't think we need to jump in it and throw all of our efforts into it right now, but we did, I think it would be definitely worth exploring into.
So do we want to explore all of these HOVs? Or OHVs, sorry?
I think it may
Or-
be a good idea to start with looking at like day permits for golf carts for special events. I have significant safety concerns
Yeah.
about this, and from personal
The
experience,
side by sides on asphalt,
it's,
I have
Is-
major concerns.
we have a large population of high school students that are getting ready to drive. Okay, this is extremely concerning. I work in a community that has OHV ATV trails right now. All of the concerns that we have talked about tonight are valid, and if we deal with it on a frequent basis, noise, underage, ill-equipped recreation vehicles, and we have an in-house police department that deals with this specifically. LCSO, this is not part of the contract. This is an ancillary function that is going to require a different level of enforcement that's going to be extremely difficult. And the reason why it works in our community for recreation is because we're surrounded by open space, BLM land, where they're riding their ATV vehicles and going off jumps and doing outdoor recreating. Commuting around in the community on those types of vehicles is not safe. It's not a good idea. I am very much for the golf cart for short-term special event type situations. But opening our community up to this risk is not a good idea. I'm not in support of that at all.
Yeah, I'm not in support of the side by side at the time being. Golf carts, I'd be interested in looking into, but something with parks and trails personally. I mean, side by sides on asphalt, if you're just asking people to roll over. I mean, in all reality, they're not designed for sticking to asphalt, they're designed for sticking to dirt, loose stuff. You try to turn one of those things and it's locked in four-wheel drive, you're gonna tip it over at 5 miles an hour or 50, doesn't matter. I've seen it plenty of times. I did it last summer.
Well, and half of our
Um,
roads are not paved, half of our roads are dirt.
Right.
So there-
And then trying to catch, like, if somebody is in violation,
It's
how
hard.
can you pursue them?
You
They're gonna
can't.
outrun a cop car,
You can't. It's
they're gonna
because
go off road and just book it.
pursuing them creates a higher risk
Yeah.
of putting citizens in danger. So they don't pursue them, and that's a problem. That's a serious enforcement problem.
Yeah.
So I had a question. So Hallie, I know we talked a lot about cost for signage and things like that. If we were to explore something like doing, maybe we pick a couple of days throughout the year, we do like the special permits for golf cart. Would that be significantly less of a drain in terms of staff resources? To do something on a smaller scale start, or?
I think if it's an exemption day, there's not like a general registration process, that would be significantly less staff time. I think there would still need to be a level of insurance and,
No, I'm sure that
No.
there is, but I'm saying versus trying to figure out, okay, we gotta change road signs and all this other stuff,
Yeah.
but if we were to say, maybe we do that as a pilot, where we say, okay, maybe on the 4th of July, and if there's some other day that's significant, where it's like, hey, this might be a good time to allow people, and that there's a process they go through, they still have to show, they've got to sign up, they've got to register their golf cart, they have to do that, because
Yeah,
Maybe
maybe
that's what it-
designate a road that they can go travel on.
And maybe that is a way that, one, it allows us to see how many people would actually take advantage of it, because if we see that there's. We get hundreds of applications, then it's like, maybe we should do a bit more with that, but it allows us to do that in a way that. We can kind of see, you know, what is the
I think that'd
impact
be
of that.
I am curious to, I am putting him on the spot, but just 4th of July is a very busy day for
Yes.
LTSO, so I love to get your input on that potential, if there'd be additional staff needed for that designation.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question, please?
All good. If we were to do a pilot program on the 4th of July where residents would apply for an exemption permit in which they would operate a golf cart, provide insurance, provide all the necessary documents, and we give a designated route for them to take just for the day of the event. Would that be additional staffing needed for your team in order to ensure the safety of the community beyond the things you were already doing for enforcement with fireworks and the influx of population in general?
Obviously, that's a big unknown.
Mhm.
We've just never experienced it before. I don't think that we would need any additional staffing just to monitor that type of activity. But obviously, there's always the first year, and then we could kind of adjust after that. I don't know at this point because we've just never had to deal with it.
Does Kremling have statistics on accidents, injuries and all that type of stuff with the ATVs and that type of stuff?
Probably trying to pull some information for you if you'd like.
I mean, camping trip I did with 20 people last summer. Everybody had a side by side, 5 of them they rolled.
Really?
I mean, yeah, we do hear a lot about the extra impact it puts on emergency services. But we deal with it year round because we also have snowmobiling.
Right.
When you're in the mountains and you drive differently when you're camping in the mountains than what you would drive.
Yeah.
On roads and streets with, most of our streets are neighborhoods and most of them are 25 miles per hour or under. I can think of maybe a handful of roads that are actually over 25 miles per hour, and those are those main collectors that.
Yeah.
We had been talking about. So,
It's a visibility thing because you can't see those ATVs and golf carts over the hood of a car or a truck. Especially if people aren't abiding by the red, lines in front of the post office and stuff.
that's
And
what.
so, I mean, but,
Did you have something?
it only takes one.
Yes, sir. We happen to have Deputy Zach Anderson in the room. He is the community impact deputy for the town of Berthoud, in the town of Berthoud, where they allow golf carts. So you might have an interesting perspective on that very thing.
So I'm more than happy to get you guys in contact with our town with it. So they legalized it. We don't have a legal licensing requirement right now, just because the town wanted to approve it with the TPC golf course that's down there. Because those roadways within that neighborhood are actually town owned. So obviously the golf course being multi-billion-dollar companies like, hey, we need this to go, like we're actually a golf course. And then they needed to allow it in the town. So there's restrictions that Berthoud has on it. So it has to be a licensed adult that's driving. Obviously, you can't be drunk on a golf cart. You can still get a DUI, caught up all that stuff. And then it's pretty limited on where it could go. So it can only go on a road that's 25 and over. And then anything else like UTVs, side by sides, anything that does over 25 is illegal still. So it's just golf carts specifically that are still legalized. And then it's limited. So like been to Berthoud, like can't go on First Street, any of the highways that includes like Mountain Avenue. You can cross it, you just can't like drive down it. We haven't dealt with a ton of issues with it. We might get the occasional kids that are driving around in it, but it's pretty easy to pick them out if you know your town and like you just show up at their house and you're like, hey, you gotta knock this off. More that's our host know who they are, right? But obviously, most of the time we see is that like our special events, it hasn't caused us, at least in our jurisdiction, any extra staffing stuff. And then we haven't had any like crashes or anything like that involved in the golf carts. Obviously, it's pretty limited where they can drive them. And most of the people are limited to daytime because we require if they're going to drive them at night that you have things like headlights, taillights, all that kind of stuff, turn signals. If it's going on, and most of the people just don't want to pay for the extras on their golf carts, they're just using it the putts around like at birthday days or the 4th of July that we have, that kind of stuff. And then you obviously can't take it on like sidewalks, bike paths and that sort of stuff. So obviously, if it's something you're exploring, you guys are more than welcome to reach out to our town because they approved it through the ordinance and the municipal code. And then we kind of enforce the end of it, but hasn't been like a huge undertaking on us to do it. Obviously, if you expand beyond that, that can create some headaches, but the golf carts, at least for the start of Berthoud, is what they kind of started with when they got approached it, and it hasn't been tremendous on us. We've had a couple complaints on it, but they're pretty easy to track down on our end of it. And track them down, and most of it's daytime use anyways, so.
Awesome, thank you. That is
Thank you.
super helpful.
Yeah,
Kind of the generalized idea and
So
looking
I'd
at
say
it.
moving forward, we could look into golf carts.
So certainly, and Berthoud is very similar to Windsor, and I was in Windsor when we allowed golf carts, and it was specific because of the golf courses. And that's what happened in Berthoud as well. There was a gap that needed to be filled. And that's what I'm always looking for when I'm looking at the town of Wellington, and what does staff need to work on? What's really important? What are those really important top priorities, and what are those gaps? And if you all feel that this is one of those gaps that you want staff to spend time on, we will certainly do that. I think I heard from you, maybe day permits for special events is something we would look at. I think Trustee Daly brought up a good point of looking at the Parks and Trails Master Plan when it comes up, that we maybe look at options for those side-by-sides and OHVs and things like that. So again, we've got a lot of projects going on, and we're being
Right.
tasked with a lot of different things. So I want to make sure that this is a priority for you, and you want town staff to be putting time into this, because it will probably mean Hallie's not working on something else. And I don't know what that is yet. I can't say, but
Right.
I'm just saying, every time you say, well, we would like for you to do some more work on this, it means that we're probably kicking something else off.
So beyond the 4th of July, what
Mhm.
would be like the next small scale event for?
Hmm.
That we would use golf carts for?
Brewfest,
Yeah, I don't know,
but you're drinking there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, maybe not a good idea.
And it's too cold during Parade of Light. I mean,
Yeah,
people
Parade of
could
Light.
do it, but it'd be,
Halloween is, I was trying to think of times that Main Street's closed.
Yeah.
You've got the trick or treat down Main Street, Main
Yeah.
Street's closed. You've got the Parade of Lights, and you've
Mhm.
got 4th of July. Those are typically the only times that we close down Cleveland
Right.
down.
Right.
So if you think about big events, those are the three.
Mhm.
So I think that like 4th of July planning starts on July 5th. Seeing what comes out of the Parks Master Plan, and then maybe looking at a golf cart option for like maybe a future 4th of July, or finding a smaller event to test it at that we don't serve alcohol. And close Main Street could be an option to see if it is worth
Mhm.
investing a lot of staff time.
Or, it could be an option to promote our farmers markets or something like that. Maybe there's a special farmers market that we want to, or it's the National Night Out,
Yeah.
It's actually not bad.
because
I have a couple comments if I could. And I'm just gonna be like super honest here. The only time I would drive a side by side is to do jumps. I want to put that out there. The only time I generally opt to drive a golf cart is when I've been drinking. So do not drive a car. I'm just gonna be completely honest. That's what a lot of people would think. So I don't think what we should do that. I don't think what I maybe think that we should pursue, especially with such short notice, is maybe consider adding to an event permit the exclusion for those putting on an event to utilize golf carts for the purpose of managing the event. As of right now, so the golf carts that are utilized by the event staff, by the event organization, for those people utilizing an event through the event permitting process that's already created, I think I see that as already a created process, just another checkbox of, will you be using golf carts or no? If so, are they insured? Like those type of things. But I guarantee you, if we're allowing people to utilize golf carts for special events, they will use that as their designated driver. Like they'll use that thinking that that's what they should do and for drunk driving. I'm just gonna be completely honest. That's what people utilize it as. Instead of driving their cars, they will drunk drive their golf carts. So I just want to put that warning out there. I don't know if we should jump into this necessarily. And it's definitely not a top priority for me and not something I think that we should be utilizing staff time for above a lot of other items that we should probably be working on.
Not everyone feels that way about people utilizing the golf carts for drunk driving. I just want to put that out there because I'm not going to lay that on our entire community that they would choose to drunk drive if they can drive a golf cart. They're just putting that out there. If this isn't something that you guys want to pursue right now, it is what it is. I'm open for pursuing it, but there has to be a way. I mean, the town that you had spoke about that uses the highway access, they're actually in their third year approval. So they went through their first 3 years and then they just got approved for that second. So they're on their good ahead onto their 6 years of doing this. And they said they had saw such great success with it and positive feedback, which is why they extended it. And it was being utilized in the first place. You can also look on the website that they have. It'll tell you any accidents, the counts of tickets, if anyone's received it. It gives you all of that feedback and information. It's not super high. It's pretty much more dangerous to drive a motorcycle on our roads that is legally licensed than it was to drive a side-by-side or a golf cart up in that area. Because I sent you the research. I had done a lot of research on this when it was first asked of me by a resident. So
Yeah, I don't know, so this is worth our town's time with everything that we have on our plate currently. I mean, do we want to take them off of something that's potentially more important to do something that's more or less frivolous in a sense? I mean, we don't have recreation that's readily available. Liability. It's pretty huge. I don't know. I don't think we should be pursuing this right now. In all honesty, it's a great idea. I would love to. Don't get me wrong. But I don't think we have the resources, the money, the things to be able to do this properly, do it right, even get anything really out of it other than wasting kind of money.
Hey, if we have a golf course who is interested in Wellington, that might be another story, but
Yeah, I'll talk
I don't-
more.
yeah, I don't think that's the case.
And
They
I'm
would
not
not
sure.
use our water.
Well, I think, and I agree, I think this is, the topic itself is good. I believe that there could be some options, but right now, we just have a lot going on. I think maybe we bring this back and when we start talking about let's see, the next election, 2024, this next strategic plan and the goals, and maybe this is something, I mean, hopefully by then we'll have some of that Parks and Trails master plan done. I don't want to lose it.
Right.
The timing is just,
Maybe a little too premature.
it's difficult, and it's something that, I know we would want to probably do this summer, so I'm happy to put it on our list of topics to readdress next year. I think trustee Teets had even mentioned that she was okay with, if we need to wait and look at a 2024 budget item, if we need to have some staffing to help with monitoring or however that looks, that's something we can look at for 2024.
I think that's smart.
Only concern that I have with that is if we talked about whether or not this should be incorporated into the Parks and Trails master plan, if we wait to have a discussion about it until after that master plan is done,
But
so
if they move forward knowing this is something that we're interested in.
are we saying that we want, if we're gonna say that's fine, but we need to say,
Yeah,
if we want them to actually incorporate that into the master plan, we kind of need to give that direction. We've kind of, this is a possibility, but we haven't actually said, yes, this should be considered in the master plan. And if we're not going to revisit this until after the election next year and the Parks and Trails master plan is done, and we've never given that direction. So if we're going to give that direction, we need to give that direction. If we're not going to give that direction, we need to I just think we just need to be clear. If that's going to be part of the consideration, we need to give that direction prior to that master plan happening.
I will find out the timing for that Parks and Trails master plan because I'm not quite sure when, unless trustee Daly knows the exact timing for that. So
RFP will go in the fall.
Okay, so RFP will go out in the fall, so we would be right on track for 2024 then. If the RFP goes out in the fall, then it's not, it's that'll so fall. Maybe first part of the year is when everything will get finalized and start being worked on, so.
Right, but if we, so that's fine, I'm just saying, do we want to give direction that we want them to look into off-highway vehicles as part of that master plan, and that way they can take that into consideration?
I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good plan.
Great, that's all, I just want to make sure that.
I think that's a good start.
Yes, absolutely. All right, quick recess.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. know that.
Yes,
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, now we will move on to enforcement of irrigation restrictions. Holly Sheldon.
Perfect. All righty. So next topic is relating to the discussion of the irrigation restrictions resolution. The board discussion on the work session in March that they would like to look forward to a enforcement plan moving forward with. We are going to be putting water restrictions in place. I wanted to outline first and foremost that we already have enforcement outlined in our municipal code. It falls under a watering violation. They would be summoned to court, and they would go through that proceeding currently. So if there is a desire to do something beyond the watering violation that's already in place, that would be a code change. An example, some communities do like a fine structure. So rather than them going to court, there would just be a town staff designation of if there is a violation, they receive like a door hanger that says this is your first warning. The secondary warning could be $100. The third violation warning would be $250, and then anything on from that. That would just fall outside the purview of municipal court. I have looked at various communities and how they enforce things. It's a mixed bag. It kind of depends on the community. Some have exactly what the town of Wellington has in their current code with the municipal court watering violation. Other communities have the fine structure that is outside the purview of court. But for the majority, I would say the majority of water restrictions that are in place in the state of Colorado, in specific communities, there is not an enforcement plan in place. It's more of an information and education process. Do your part. Please water within the restrictions. There is an opportunity for residents on their website to report if there is a neighbor that is watering outside of their restricted hours, and it allows the community to reach out to those neighbors individually and just remind them, let them know that this is in place. Maybe they didn't see the ordinance or the signs around town. But I would say 3 out of 4 communities, that is the approach that they have been taking. Even if they do have this enforcement in their code or this enforcement in the fine structure, it is mostly education and information.
Thank you. Do those communities have strain on their water services or at their time being?
I would say the strain would be on their supply, not their treatment process.
Okay.
So just the amount of water in their reservoir that they pull from.
I think one advantage we got out here right at the moment is our pricing. Because that's gonna keep water use down pretty good anyway. You know, I don't necessarily, reading this, and it says that most communities do not enforce it. And that's where we're going from a voluntary to a mandatory, where it sounds like you're gonna have some very strict enforcement on it. If you don't enforce it, why have it? Make it voluntary at that point. I don't know, I just have, and especially when you take some of the power of what HOAs can do to the communities to help try to regulate their communities too. From what I understand, if we have a mandatory water restriction, then people could just say the heck with watering their yards, let everything go to heck in a handbag.
That's
And
not
the HOA
exactly,
has,
that's not exactly
it is.
correct with HOAs, and I sent an email regarding this. Essentially, if the town has a mandatory, a watering restriction in
Mhm.
place, and then the state statutes don't necessarily discuss the voluntary restrictions because it is voluntary and really a restriction.
Yeah.
But under state statute, if an HOA has a provision for fining somebody for a dead lawn, for
Mhm.
example, they cannot fine somebody for a dead lawn if the person is watering in compliance with the watering restriction. And so, for example, the town of Wellington's code in the past has said you can water twice a week, is that, I think is what we've done
Yeah.
recently.
Okay.
And so if the HOA came in and said your lawn is dead, and the person said, I've been watering Mondays and Wednesdays, just like it says, but it's so hot that my lawn is dying, the HOA can't fine them. If the HOA comes in and says your lawn is dead, and the person said, I'm not watering at all because the town says I can only water 2 days a week, that they don't care, that doesn't offer a safe harbor there. They have to, they simply can't say, you're complying with the town's regulations, but our rules are supersede that. And so we're gonna fine you even though you're following the rules. So that what we're saying
Okay,
is
so
up
the
to the
HOAs, as long as we let them know that that is available to them.
If there is a restriction in place, if a person is watering in compliance with the restriction, and yet, and even then, if their lawn dies, the HOA can't fine.
Okay. But if they're not watering at all, they can.
I mean, they still.
Right.
Yeah, yes.
Okay, cool.
And typically under the current restrictions that we would have in place, the 2 days a week for a prolonged period of time is actually the encouraged watering approach in the state of Colorado. It promotes a deeper root growth. It's something that we promote through our water efficiency program in the first place, just because you have a more drought resistant lawn term.
So, I would agree with a lot of what Trustee Wiegand said. I think pricing is going to be a big engagement. We talked about this last night in the finance committee, even like with leaks, people are very quickly getting in contact with the town when they have a leak now, because it actually impacts the bill, where before it was, you could use tens of thousands of gallons of water and your bill went up by $30. And it was like, I mean, no big deal. Now it's something, or as soon as it goes up, people are like, oh my gosh, I gotta do that. So I think that'll have a big impact. And I appreciate you pulling different stuff, and especially since I was one who asked that we go through this. Hearing that 3 out of 4 communities are really taking the education and information approach. I have absolutely no problem going education and communication. That is my preference. What I have issue with is what we kind of discussed before, is we really want to go with this is mandatory. And if it's mandatory, then there needs to be enforcement. And so by having a mandatory restriction, and we already have all the enforcement in there, I would 100% say that it needs to stay with court. I know it's not convenient to people, but I think there needs to be due process. They need to have that opportunity to come in front of the judge and share their side of it if it, comes to that thing, right? I think people need to have their due process. So I wouldn't want to go the route of just, door hangers and here's your fine with no due process. But I think if we're going to go the information and education route, I don't know if there's wording we can change it to make it okay. There's the informational stage of our water restrictions, and then there's the enforcement stage, and maybe we have that. But if we're going to say it's mandatory and there are fines attached, then we actually need to follow through on that, because otherwise I see this a lot in other areas of government where it's virtue signaling. Say, hey, guess what? We're good people because we have water restrictions, but we're never actually going to enforce them. But look at us because we have them. It's like, well, we're not actually, if our goal is actually to make sure that people don't overuse the water plants, and we're saying this is the tool we have chosen to use for that, then we need to actually apply that tool. Otherwise, let's go what I suggested before and say, okay, we're going to focus on the informational and education route, work with us. But if we're going to go the other route, we need to actually go the other route and follow through on that, not just say we're going the hard route, but we're not actually going that. We just need to enforce it. And I'm happy enforcement we already have in code. We don't need to add new enforcement, keep the fines and stuff that's in the code. We just need to actually do it.
Well, what I'm hearing is that we have implemented different measures to be able to enforce responsible water usage, but that we go through this rigmarole every year because the code says mandatory. So what I'm hearing is that maybe we need to look at a water restriction enforcement code that fits the way that we do it here in the community, instead of having the discussion every year. So if we're going with an education model, let's change it from mandatory to like, these are the steps. Like, is that an option?
That is an option. I would say
Do this every year.
the town is in a unique situation right now with the treatment plants under the expansion process. I think this is a great conversation to update once we have our plants at full capacity. I would encourage the mandatory restrictions just for public consumption for the next 2 years while we finish these plants. But I do think that is a great conversation that does need to happen for a long-term plan with watering restrictions and enforcement and education versus information. I apologize if my initial presentation seemed like it was encouraging more of the voluntary approach. It mostly was the research that I'm doing. Wellington is in a unique situation, and the research I was looking at was mostly based on drought, which is a great indicator that the town will need to look at of course, but we're in a unique situation where I think the mandatory restrictions need to be in place for the treatment capacity of our plants.
So the challenge that I have with the mandatory enforcement piece is it's encouraging neighbor telling on neighbors, kind of like with the snow removal situation. So with the enforcement plan, I guess what I was looking for, are we gonna be monitoring people's water usage? And then like, how are we gonna determine the difference between somebody who's addressing a garden or
I mean,
it's a leak?
but for a community to function well, if there's something that's mandatory, wouldn't you more or less want your neighbor to say something if you were doing something that wasn't right and could potentially harm the community? If we can't treat the water, the plant goes down because we're overworking the pumps or whatever the case may be. I would rather have my neighbor turn me in than not turn me in. I would want it to be mandatory and enforced.
We have no backup. I think that's at the end of the day, that
We
is
need to
the
protect
greatest
our plant,
concern.
protect our water.
Yep.
And if we're on such a heavy load in the summertime, I mean, I say we keep it as it is, but enforce it. And yeah, sure, maybe it's, there's gonna be those people out there that are like, I don't rat, or I'm not a rat, I'm not a snitch. Well, that whole culture to me is kind of a joke. I think we just need to protect our community and protect our plants.
I would agree with the mayor pro tem. I do not want this to turn into we're encouraging neighbors against neighbors. That's.
We're not urging them against them.
I think that
And how are you gonna prove?
if we're gonna
If
have.
you see a drunk driver, do you call the sheriff's department? Do you call the number? They're breaking the law.
Well, that's what.
So where's the line?
Isn't a better model to go knock on your neighbor's door and say, hey, your hose has been running all night long, instead of calling town
Yes,
staff? and
yeah,
sending out
I would say that. I would say, go tell your neighbor, be like, hey, just a heads up, but I don't think we should have. A spot on the website that's like, report your neighbor here for water violation.
So then let's not do that, but let's make it enforcement, mandatory enforcement.
What hasn't worked about how we've been operating in the last year or two?
We haven't enforced it. Is what we were told this last
But
year
like,
when I brought this
is-
up, is we weren't enforcing it.
Is the issue because we're not enforcing it, or because there's a problem because we're not enforcing it? Is there a problem because it's not being enforced, or are we just saying that we're not enforcing it, so it's a problem?
So what I found, and I talked to Cody today, just as a follow-up and as a reminder to see how how it worked in the past, was that when somebody was reported, or if our code enforcement was driving around and saw somebody watering on an off day, they got like a door hanger, just a reminder, this is what we do. This is our ordinance or our resolution. And then there was not and he was documenting those addresses, and then he didn't get a call back, or didn't, as he was driving around, he wouldn't see that person or that residence watering off cycle again. We did have some reports from Public Works a couple different times that they found, we have one code enforcement officer. So it's kind of like the police when on fireworks, they get the call that, so-and-so, at 1210, Joe Street is, watering, it's not their day. And by the time they get over there, the water's off type thing. So it's really hard to monitor. But from our perspective, from the town and what we have documented, that once somebody received the educational information, they complied. So that was why there was no enforcement. I mean, we enforced through the educational piece, and then as a follow-up, we did not see them out of compliance again. Again, there were some reports from Public Works, but again, it was, and not that they could not do it, but they have no enforcement capabilities. So it was like, a call, or they, let code enforcement know. By the time code enforcement got over, it was, there was nothing to prove.
So question, show of hands, who followed the watering restrictions last year?
I did.
Cause you got what?
Sorry. Did you get a door hanger?
No.
Okay.
It's because I was a public servant.
Yep.
You gotta represent.
I don't know that there was, and I want to make sure it's clear. My issue with it is not that, it didn't work last year. My issue is the same as it's been for the last 3 years, is that I'm opposed to us saying, this is a rule that we are going to enforce and there's a penalty. And then we as elected officials kind of said expressly the last 3 years, well, we're not actually going to enforce it. Which to me is why I said, well, if we're gonna go that route, let's just go the route of information and education, but. If we're gonna enforce it, we need to not be this like, because it's the whole thing of. We wanna do this, but we don't want people mad at us because they got, they got a ticket for watering because they did it multiple times and ignored the first one. So.
Trustee David's got a question or a comment.
Hey, yeah, a lot of what I was thinking has already been said. I'm a big fan of warnings. If I were to get pulled over for speeding, I think whoever is pulling me over should have the authority to decide whether or not I should get a warning or a ticket, especially to determine if my actions are malicious or outrageous or, with intent to hurt or put other people at risk. So I think we should, our professional staff who has that authority and that professional opinion would have that background to determine how significant that threat might be to determine the appropriate actions. So, I mean, if someone's speeding, for example, and they aren't posing a significant public safety threat, and it was on accident, well, I don't know if speeding's on accident ever, but a safety would do the trick and they get it and then they're going to comply going forward. I think that accomplishes what we're trying to do. And that education does what we need to and upholds the law, which is the mandatory restriction. So now someone then chooses to be outrageous following that, in spite of after being educated and having an opportunity to comply, then absolutely. And we have those steps already in place. So if those scenarios have not yet occurred, then I don't think that we're saying that we have failed to do that in the past, but those scenarios have just yet to happen. So I think stick with what we got. We've been lucky and we've seen in the data how the improvements of the water usage have been when the mandatory restrictions have gone in place. I mean, the data has come back to us and we've seen as a spot of the restrictions went in place on this month and we saw the improvements when Bob came back and showed us the data. So, I mean, this works. We see the improvements overall and we have a plan in place already for enforcement, but luckily we haven't had to do it. Now, see something, say something, sure, but let's leave it up to the professionals to enforce it with the plan we already have in place. I think we're in a good spot already. I'm happy with how we have it.
I speak a little bit to kind of how this would work in municipal court. Just very briefly, I think there would be a real concern with issuing not citation, but if we issue a summons and say on the very first offense, you're going to go to court. And so, I mean, the current process really is if somebody sees a violation who has co-compliance ability, the first thing they're going to do is provide a door hanger, and that provides notice. Like that is the town telling the person this is an ordinance and you have to comply with it. If that didn't happen first and they went to court and they were just received a summons the first time, the court would absolutely say, did you know this was a law? And they would say, well, I had no idea. You don't follow every town board meeting, you don't watch every meeting. Well, so I think that education piece is a vital first step in the enforcement process. So I think our current process
Is great.
it works as it should in terms of how the summons. We haven't had any summons because the first step would be making sure they know. And it's essentially a warning, a door hanger, something like that. And in our experience, that has been effective.
Okay, so in the last year, we didn't have one situation where someone received more than one notification.
Understand?
Not that I know of.
That's our understanding.
So I don't have a problem with like one warning, but the problem is before it was, we as the trustees kind of explicitly had kind of given direction, we really don't want to see people fined unless it's like egregious. That was really what I was part of those discussions, right?
Sure.
And so I'm fine with giving people warning, but I think it needs to be, you get one warning. If we're back here again, you're getting the summons.
Yeah, I think
I don't think there's, we warned you, oh, I went on vacation, forgot, I'm sorry.
Mhm.
You had your warning, this time you're getting the summons, because it is getting to the point where when I'm talking to people, they're trying to say, well, they're not gonna enforce it, I'm just gonna do whatever I want. Why would I follow the restrictions? You're not gonna find me anyways. And that's not, it goes completely against our purpose
Yeah.
Sure.
to get there. So I'm fine with, they get a warning, Now you know,
If I
and then,
can, really quick. And I understand all of this and either which way is fine. But then the ordinance needs changed because it reads, the Board of Trustees shall have the authority to establish such rules and regulations so as to limit the days, hours of outdoor watering and sprinkling, or to limit the use of water in such a manner as the town board shall deem necessary. Such regulations may be adopted by resolution and shall become effective immediately upon passage. Enforcement shall be by summons issued in accordance with the section of this code. And the property of any user violating this provision shall be subject to utility service termination. Each day that such violation continues to exist shall be considered a separate offense. So as our law reads now, it says that enforcement is a summons.
And
It
that is
doesn't
the case.
discuss a warning, it doesn't discuss anything, it discusses that enforcement shall be a summons issued in accordance with our laws.
Like,
So that's,
if it's enforced, it would be by summons. It's just that before a summons is issued for enforcement, they are making sure there's notice. I think that's perfectly in compliance with that ordinance. I wouldn't want to put in the ordinance a single warning issue. I think if the board wanted to put that by resolution, this ordinance allows you to set rules and regulations for how this is done. But our current process is enforcement is by summons. It's just that hasn't been necessary so far.
Well, she brought up a valid point. I mean, part of that says shall,
Mm-hmm.
and shall is black and white. And what it should say is may.
No, because
No,
it's saying that if it's
Because
being
for
enforced, it
enforcement,
is
if
a
it's
summons.
being enforced,
It's, she read it. It says
Right.
now summons.
right,
There's
and
no,
being
that
enforced.
means that there's
no
no in between.
the gray, so
Right.
we want,
When enforcement happens, there is no gray.
Yeah,
Before enforcement, you can give a warning.
but that's not.
No,
written.
no, there's
the
also,
warning is part of the enforcement process. What we're saying is that the first step of enforcement is education and the second step of enforcement is the fine.
Right, so it just needs to either be worded differently or,
Dan, do you think? that
I
it
don't
needs to
think
be
that's
worded differently?
necessary. When this is being enforced, it is by someone. What this is, the statement is saying is when saying enforcement shall be by summons, that's saying enforcement. It's not saying enforcement shall be by ticket or something else. When this is enforced, it is by summons. A notice before that is perfectly in alignment with enforcement being by our current process. I'm not sure how we would change this.
Yeah, I think
This
I
is-
don't think there's an issue here, quite frankly. I like the language that's here, to agree with trustee Daly. I think this makes a lot of sense and to what Ms. Sheldon said earlier, right? All this is about for now is protecting the water plant until 2024, right?
Right.
After that, get these restrictions out of here. Just get them out of here, right? After that point, but until that's done, right? So I like the language that we've got on the books, quite frankly, and the fact that we haven't had any repeat offenders over the last number of years. I don't see a problem here, I suppose.
So as a board, can we kind of give direction to this is great to go ahead with? We continue with the process and just we as a board collectively will say enforcement follows if, you know, you don't keep warning. I mean, that's pretty fair not to say, instead of blatantly saying, well, it won't be enforced, but well, it will be enforced if it's needed.
And I would say down the road, if we do become into an extreme situation, we can go ahead and make more extreme enforcement at that point. You know,
Yeah.
DEFCON 1 to DEFCON 2 at that point, you know? And I think the educational part initially is great. And again, the cost of water here is its own restriction.
Yeah.
you would think so until you look at the numbers that they released from the water treatment plant. So all of those numbers that were released from the water treatment plant, so we had these and we were sharing information and sharing data last year. There were signs in neighborhoods saying to conserve water and there's restrictions. And we saw higher usage last year than the year previously.
I think we're kind of going out.
Yeah, that's
rabbit
off track.
hole here, 'cause
Yeah.
we're not, I had my own pitch, so I'm personally opposed to the mandatory restrictions, but I think that we should go forward with, if we're gonna do the mandatory restrictions, that we just make it clear that our policy as a board is we're making sure people are aware of the law. So if we see that, you're gonna get a notification, and maybe there's wording we can throw somewhere else in there. If there is, great. If there's not, as long as staff, and this has been practice, but I think what I want to make sure is clear is that the policy of the board is if we're back again, there's not a second warning.
Yeah.
You are now you're now under, now you can go to the judge and that you have your day in court, and if the judge decides that there's a valid reason, great. But that shows people that we're taking this seriously.
Yeah.
So don't roll the dice and
Cool.
just say,
There's some heat.
that's my thought process. If we're gonna do it, so I'd like to see it done.
Okay. Clear as mud?
Clear as mud. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. We'll have this on your next agenda and we'll work with Dan to get some information to make sure that we get all your points covered. And it does say in there, if water production levels fall below what's required, that the town engineer and the town administrator can make those decisions about how those mandatory watering, like severe watering restrictions would be
Even
taken
more
care of
severe.
from an
Perfect.
administrative standpoint.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, you guys. Great discussion.
Next one is marijuana sales tax. Charity Campfield.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the board. So this evening, I wanted to talk to you about some of the logistics of rolling out our marijuana sales tax revenue, since we may be seeing that come in later this year, early next year. I wanted to break down what the different taxes are gonna look like for the town and what we are proposing to do with it. So first, we have our regular Wellington sales tax, that's 3%. We passed in 2020, when we passed the sale of recreational marijuana, to impose by ordinance a 3% sales tax on marijuana. This can be increased to 5% after what, January?
Is that on top of the already 3%?
Yes.
Okay.
So right now we have a little wiggle room with what was written and passed for the local marijuana tax. It's currently set at 3.5%. You as a board can, by ordinance, raise it up to 5% or leave it at 3%.
3.5.
Or 3.5 or.
Yes,
whatever
3.5.
the-
So the other two types of marijuana revenue, you have your state of Colorado marijuana excise tax. That's a 15% tax imposed on all marijuana sales. We would see 5% of the 15% imposed. That's the same with the marijuana sales tax with the state. We receive this money much like we do the cigarette tax money, so it will come from the state. It will be sent to us separately. The sales tax for Wellington will be in the pot with all of our sales tax revenue. And then the local marijuana sales tax will be something that we will have to self-collect. So we have 3 different revenue streams coming in 3 different manners from marijuana money. So the voters approved certain uses for your sales tax revenue. It was for future community recreation centers or to go to the general fund. Because of Tabor, we can only limit those 2 purposes for this revenue. Based on your strategic plan, what staff is proposing is that we create a separate community center development fund, where the 3 pots of money, the local marijuana sales tax, the state excise tax, and the state sales tax, all goes into a separate fund. The sales tax that we receive with all of our general sales tax would go into the general fund with the rest of it. The purpose of creating this separate fund is that we can isolate that money and we can really track how much we're getting. The reason why we are proposing to separate this out is this is brand new business. We have not seen any of this revenue. We don't know how much we're going to get. And I think being able to set it out for a specific purpose instead of designating it to a needed expense immediately, we're not putting ourselves in a financial situation where we become dependent on that money because we don't have certainty of what it's going to be. I also think, designating these funds in that manner, we can set it annually. So it doesn't have to be going to that purpose every year. It can change year over year. This gives you guys a little leeway to really understand the market and see how much we could do in 2, 5, 10 years towards a community center. So I think the next steps would be, we would need direction from you as to Do we change the local marijuana sales tax rate? Do you want to keep it at 3.5%? Do you want to increase it? We would work, if your direction were approved, to create that separate fund to track the money separately. And then I think we would need to monitor until 2025, because that would give us at least a full year of revenue to see what we could be expecting annually. After that, if you did have direction to change the percentage, we could take that to the finance committee and do some analysis of what would be a marketable local marijuana sales tax rate. So that is all I have.
I'd like to note the exact language of the ordinance with regard to the uses of the money. Says the Board of Trustees hereby declares that the purpose of the levy of the retail marijuana sales tax imposed by this article is for raising funds for construction of a new community or recreation center and or other general operating expenses as may be designated by the town on an annual basis. So Cherry and I talked about this quite a bit, and it's certainly community and recreation center is clearly stated in there, but then there's the and or general operating expenses, which is a real broad. So as you're thinking about what to use this money for, just that's the language that's in there.
Trustee Wiegand?
To increase it from 3.5 to 5. Is it just through us? Or do we- Okay, that's.
Via
cool.
ordinance.
And yeah, I would think initially 5% would be a smart thought for us, because again, we don't know exactly what this is going to put on the town, whether it's the policing, whether it's the wear and tear on the roads and all this type of stuff. And also too, I think we need to probably designate that money, not, a little bit of at least going to the general fund. Because
So that proposal, the 3% sales tax that our regular sales tax
right,
would be going to the general fund.
okay, but even the other 5 on top of that.
And
Well, you got 10%, then you got the 3.5%, and then you got 3%, or is it just 3.5?
no, it'd be total of 16.
Yeah,
Or,
Okay.
sorry, 18.
3,
There's,
3, 5,
Wait.
5, and 5.
Okay,
Well, so it's 5 and 15.
Well,
So
yeah.
you have $100 of pot sold, the state tax is $15, we see 75 cents of that.
Mhm.
So
two,
Okay.
it's very minimal what we are gonna get from the state.
okay, you got
So-
well, 15 on the excise, 15 on the sales tax,
The
from the
state
state,
sales,
and we get 5 off of each one of
5
those.
off of the 15%.
Yeah.
which is it? Because you have two on here. You have.
You have two, yeah, you did have 315s where we get
And you
5.
have the sales tax. Are those
Right.
the same thing?
We get 5 of the 15% is.
Okay,
But
how
you
it's-
had
not twice.
15%,
There's 15% and we get 5% of that 15, so it's a big.
one or off of 2.
Off of 2, so it's like, for every $30 the state taxes off of 100, we get $1.50.
Okay, so. it's-
Yeah.
Okay, that's,
So if you look on page
Okay.
45, she broke it out really well. And I think the
That's not
only
right.
thing, because we don't have a choice on the 2 5s,
Mm-mm.
the state
The
regulates
state
that.
collects it
On
and then
the
the state.
Third
sends us the money.
one,
Right.
all you're wanting to know is if we want that to remain at the 3.5 or we want it to go up to a 5%.
It was written to where you guys can increase it.
And change it
Yes.
in January 2022.
After January 1st, 2022, so
Got it.
since we passed that date.
Mhm.
we
Now we
have-
can choose if we want it to remain 3.5 or it to go up to the full 5%.
Or anywhere in between.
Right, yeah. I think that's pretty much all you're asking from us, correct?
And the,
And then where we want
And
to go.
how do you want this set up? Do you want
Right.
the 3 pots of money set aside for a community development fund that you guys can track year over year, and we can kind of keep that separated from the rest of our budget, so we can actively work towards achieving the goal of the community rec center,
But then we also have,
the 3% sales tax that would go into the general.
okay,
And that's because it's, they don't collect the general sales tax, that's all in like one big lump sum.
Yeah.
They don't break that out.
They
for
don't
you.
break
So
that out, and
that 3% sales tax, like I would just take that out of your brain, that's just gonna go into general operating. Like,
And
3.5 or 5s separate. And then the
Mm.
5% off of each one of the other two is separate.
And the purpose for me setting it up that way is that there were two avenues that we could use these funds for. And during your strategic plan process, it was very clear that we wanted to work towards a community development center and we wanted to work towards increasing our sales tax revenue and our fiscal sustainability. So if we split it up in those two ways, we're meeting your strategic plan goals. And we're also not earmarking that money for an immediate necessary need that we could become dependent on later and not fulfill the wish of the voters.
It's like a vacation fund.
Yeah,
Right.
so you're not going and hiring three employees to manage it, and then next year finding out that, oh crap, we don't need those 3 employees because we didn't pull as much money off of it. My one question is that 1% sales and use tax, that is still going towards the construction and reconstruction of Wellington streets, correct?
That's separate. That's it.
That's not
Completely
marijuana
separate.
tax money. I mean, it's incorporated in your total sales tax lump sum. So yes, that is still going to the streets, but this is going to be an additional income in your sales tax revenue that you'll see in the overall general fund.
Got it. Okay, so was my question, was making sure that we were still going to see, so that lump sum that we're receiving,
From the
1%
state.
of that 1% is going to the construction and reconstruction of roads and whatnot.
Yes.
Perfect. As far as the 3.5%, I'm gonna be the devil's advocate on this one, going up to the 5%. The catch and caveat to raising it this high is something you need to realize is this is a very competitive market now. So you're looking at the percent that they have to pay to state, which is excessively high, and my understanding getting ready possibly to go up again. And you have to look at the amount of sales tax they're going to have to pay as a business to operate here in general. And then you have to look at the cost that comes and is accrued to them. At the same time, you have to look at if someone has to pay 5% here, but they pay 3% in a different town, are they gonna drive that 10 minutes to go buy something that might be cheaper for them in Fort Collins when we're trying to increase our sales tax revenue here?
Well, in all reality, it probably wouldn't be that much cheaper because of gas.
No.
Right.
Yeah, when you start factoring that in, that's offsets everything.
Trustee Gator, you had something?
Yeah, so, I don't have a strong opinion either way on the tax portion. I do have a very strong opinion on setting it aside in a fund, and I agree that there should be a fund set aside. I think it should just be a general marijuana revenue funds, because yes, we've identify and promote development of community gathering spaces. There's been talk of parks, different things like that. We have not reached a point where we said this is for sure going to be a recreation center. So I do not want to set those funds aside into a fund that is specifically for that, because that could be used for things. I agree, absolutely. We should not be using those funds to hire new staff, things like that. They should be set aside till we know what's going on. But those could be things that could be used to do short-term CIP projects that need to be done. That could be used to specifically in line with this, maybe put some things in the parks that the Parks Fund doesn't have money for.
So you want like specifically capital, not operating, so you want it to be like.
Correct. I prefer that we currently use it for capital while we see what's coming in. So we basically get to the end of the year and say, okay, here's kind of what we have, and we can fund some of these. We can upgrade some of the parks, especially if we want to focus on gathering spaces. But we also talk about there's areas of roads that maybe we don't have the money for that would fall under general fund. So where it's tied to certain short-term projects, but I agree, it needs to be set aside where this is the marijuana money. So we know this is separated out from everything else and we know what's going on. Now, if we identify, whether it's this year or next year, that we are for sure pursuing a recreation center, that is 100% we're going down that road. Then at that point, by all means, let's start shifting that. But we've not had that conversation, and I don't want to have that conversation tonight. But I don't want to just stick it in a fund saying, oh, this is going to go towards that. I think it should be put in a fund where it can be used for a lot of different things. Again, like I said, parks is a great one. There's a lot of need at our parks that we just don't have the funds to do right now. And this would directly hit with those community gathering spaces that we've been talking about. And it gives us something where we're not hiring additional staff, we're not tying ourselves into things that we have to keep paying ongoing, so we can actually see what's coming in and we can determine, great, we have this much money available. That means we can fund these projects out of that. And I think that's how we should go with that. If we are gonna go the route of sticking it into a community fund, which again, I do not think we should do, the only portion that should go into that is the special marijuana sales tax. The state sales tax needs to be separated out. Because that's not governed by what the voters are doing.
Right.
So
and
if
I
we are
do
going
agree
to
with
insist
that.
on, this is going into a specifically community center development fund, the only portion that should go into that is the local marijuana tax. Nothing else should go in it. 3.5 for the 5. The 5% from the state. Obviously, the 3% sales tax, that's already its own thing. but
Simplify it.
Have a marijuana
Let's
fund.
have a fund,
It's just, this is our marijuana
a
revenue.
general marijuana revenue.
Hang
fund.
on, one quick second, that 3% sales tax from the state, they don't itemize that,
Right.
they collect it and they give you a check.
But it's
And
for
how that-
everything
that's-
together.
Yes,
That's
all the
everything.
sales tax
And
we
that's
get.
confidential,
Got it,
the
okay.
state treasurer will not.
No, that's fine. Okay, so we
So
won't have
that
that
makes
anyway.
sense.
So there's no way that could go in.
Right.
You can't separate it out.
That
Correct.
local state sales tax rate of 3%
Is the only
It should-
portion.
is the only portion, like,
Okay,
we
I
just.
just want to make sure
we don't
nothing
check
else is
that out.
going into that fund.
But the other stuff, the variable that we're trying to consider, I agree, that should be separate pot. I have a quick question. It's a little different from what the other trustees have been asking. So I would be curious to know what kind of account would we be storing that money in? Would we be looking at some sort of like investment account so that it's building high interest while we're waiting or developing a plan?
What we can do is we can put it into a college trust account because right now that's the best place for your money. They have the highest interest rates per day. We are earning a lot of interest on our money in all of our college trust accounts currently. Logistically, what we would do is we would create a marijuana sales tax fund in Casell. And then we would make sure that that money gets deposited into college trust. And we'll track it through Casell, and then that'll be part of your monthly financial statements that you see, so you can see what's coming in. We can track it year over year. Because revenue accounts, the way Casell works, they zero out every year. It has to be its own separate fund to keep it isolated from the rest of your funds. So we can have that running balance year over year.
Okay, so we can like put the money in a pot, let it make money on itself. And then set some sort of like threshold on it, so when that pot, because we don't know how, like, we could collect $100 or we could collect $100 million, we don't know yet, so, I mean. Like all of our other restricted revenue accounts, like what would be an appropriate like threshold level to where we would start considering using something like that for capital? Would it be $200,000, $500,000, or $1 million? That way we're not like.
So I'm thinking, so I'm hearing some of the questions that are coming up. And I would like to have the finance committee take a shot at this and talk about what is that? Is it 3%, 4%, 5%, and what are the justification of the recommendation and what is the justification behind it? Present some of those recommendations to the Board of Trustees. And I think that what you're talking about, Mayor Pro Tem McDonald, would be another one of those items that potentially the finance committee could talk about and provide some recommendations for.
Because I don't think we're gonna get anywhere trying to battle out what we're gonna do with
No,
it.
right now, we just need,
Right.
right now, we just need
Where
to
it's
come to the
going.
conclusion of what's the tax, and are we putting it in its own fund?
I like 4%.
Okay.
It's in the middle.
I'd like to comment.
Oh,
Recommendation.
yes, go for it.
Okay, I think that we need to maximize the tax. I'd love to see 5%. I think that we should benefit as much as possible from marijuana sales in the town. So I think we should maximize it. I don't think that'll be significant to the consumer. It's percentage wise, it is insignificant, but I think over time it would make the town more money. So I really think that we should maximize it. Secondly, I think the reason why we have a lot of confusion as to how much money will we make, how much money do we need, it's because we don't have plans for a rec center. We don't even know what kind of rec center we need. We know we need something. We know people are begging for it, but we don't know what it's going to look like. We don't know what's going to have. We don't know when it's going to happen. And I think that's the whole point. But, the voters passed this with a huge intent for it to be used towards a rec center. And that was the word on the street. That's why people voted for it. That was a very significant topic when this was being campaigned for. So from my perspective, it absolutely needs to be set aside. Absolutely. And I think the purpose and role of that money should be for recreation. Absolutely. But because we don't have a specific plan for a rec center right now, I think it does need to be reserved for recreation, but solely for that purpose, so that potentially it could pay for the plan to do the needs assessment so that we do know what we need in the future. But it needs to go for that purpose of what the community wants and what they asked for. So from my perspective, it absolutely needs to be separated and saved and used towards the purpose to go towards the goal of what they wanted and what they voted for and what they asked for. But in this case, it's not an operations for a center that doesn't exist. It might be, how do we get and what kind of center do you need and want? So I think it does need to be separated, but for the sole purpose and protected for recreation.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I think personally, I would love to hear the finance committee's recommendations as
That's
far as
pretty
it
much where
goes.
I am.
If I had to say for myself personally, I think that I've been pretty consistent in saying, and speaking about the marijuana ordinance in general, especially as far as the setbacks that we're gonna make. I've said very consistently, I do not want to change any of the setbacks. And quite frankly, if I'm gonna toe that line, I should probably toe the line of, I don't necessarily think we should change the tax either, right? This is what the voters voted for.
Well, they voted that we could change
That
it.
we
They
did
did.
change. it.
They did. And so again, yeah, I'm totally open to hearing the finance committee's recommendations as far as that goes, but I do want to make sure that I'm being consistent as far as.
So the rate of tax is not something the finance committee comes up with. The type of investment fund or how they do it, that is what they come up with to bring to us. Am I correct in that?
Well, I think it might be good to hear from them a recommendation on the sales, on the tax, whether it's 3, 4, 4.5, and provide some sort of something to support it, analysis. data.
Examples of what they can look into. And I told them all that we were talking about this tonight, so I'm gonna send them, once the video's out, I'll tell them, here's the part.
Okay.
So that they know to be paying attention. So if we choose to send it to them, that they're ready to look at it.
And-
But for example, like one of the things that we looked at with some other things that they've gone through is what are different towns that have this doing? So for example, Berthoud has their sales tax is 7%.
Mhm.
For marijuana. So it's something that they can look at, okay, what are sales taxes in Fort Collins? What are sales taxes in Berthoud? Lyons is another town that also has a marijuana, and they can look at what are some different, and then basically can get back to us as a board. Okay, we've looked at all these different towns and here's some ideas of what we think might be good. And then we can take that information and then we decide, okay, thanks for this. Thanks for what you brought us, but we think it should be this.
Okay.
But
So the guidance you're looking for is whether we should put it in a separate fund. And then we can give it to the finance committee with that. And looking at different tax rates and then bring it back to us with options.
And what I can do is I can take it to the finance committee. We can have them analyze comparable local data for their tax rates. And we can also strategize the threshold of how much do we want to have this fund have at a minimum before we venture towards the next step, and just kind of do a financial development plan for these funds.
Yes.
I think that's a good idea.
Yep, great.
Thank you. Thanks, you guys.
On to block cameras, LCSO.
So I don't know if it's easier for you if you want to scroll through or if that's
Yeah.
fine. Or I can have myself as a viewer too and move this way.
Whatever you would prefer.
The price of gas.
I'm gonna promote you to panelist. Oh, where'd you go?
think it went, it came through on my side.
Okay.
Let's see if this works.
Give it away. We give it.
Here.
All right, so as you guys know, my name is Zach Anderson. I'm what's called the Community Impact Deputy for the town of Berthoud. So I've been assigned there since 2019. And I'm also one of the like stakeholders, if you will, that was approached by the town and some of our like quality of life crimes that we had in Berthoud with it growing. So things from home burglaries, construction theft, vehicle theft, vehicle break-ins, vehicle trespasses, whatever you want to call it, all that kind of stuff. And they asked for different tools or what we can do to actually solve some of these cases. As property crimes are kind of tough for us to solve them unless you get a lead off of it. So this is one of the companies that I reached out to. They were willing to partner with us, and then we'll kind of get into what they're doing. So it's called Flock Safety. They have their own website with a whole bunch of stuff too, but I'm going to try and cover the encompass of it. My understanding is you guys have had some conversations over this. Okay, I'll kind of breeze through it. If you guys have questions at the end, but please, by all means, that's what this is for, is to have that question answered and provide as much as I can. So they're a license plate reader company. They're a little bit different than other ones as they sell to private entities as well. So neighborhood HOAs, private businesses like Walmart, anything like that can buy these cameras as well. Their access is a little bit different than ours, and we'll kind of talk what that is. So they started in 2017. They have roughly around 2,000 law enforcement partners. And Colorado was kind of a guinea pig for them to start reaching out west, where they're at, Colorado and California. And then they capture about 1 billion vehicles per month through it. So they're currently in 42 states, about 1,500 cities nationwide. And they average about 120 hot tag per alerts per hour, which basically just means that something's passing it that's hitting the system. So a stolen car, an Amber Alert, an attempt to locate on a car if it was used in like a hit and run, or like the owner has an associated like felony or misdemeanor warrant. That kind of stuff is what a hot tag alert means. So our demo that we're currently going on is going to be in total 54 cameras countywide. Right now, there's roughly about 20-ish or so of them up. And there's 3 currently in Wellington, and we'll kind of get into those as well. And so the cost is about $2,500 per camera per year. That pays for 24/7 tech service on it. So if it gets hit by a car or something like that, they'll come out, replace the camera, pays for the software that deputies use to access this. And then it pays for the storage in the cloud database that this company all owns. So that basically just means that the towns that are paying for these, neighborhoods that are paying for these, the agency itself, we don't have to buy servers to store all this data in when it comes to evidence and stuff like that. First cameras were just installed in Berthoud because that's kind of where it started, and then it grew from there for where they're at. And we have currently about 4 of them down in Berthoud that are located in 2 of our hotspot neighborhoods, if you will, to see how that progresses, because the citizens ask like, hey, our neighborhood is like #1 for crime, like we can see on the blotter, can we get these here and see what these can do for that side of it. So the current ones in Wellington are at 6th Street in Cleveland northbound, 6th Street in Cleveland southbound, and then 6th Street in Washington southbound. So there are some unique limitations to this company. And so obviously it's a computer, it can misread stuff. Plates and stuff like that can get screwed up with weather, all sorts of stuff, right? No different than a deputy sitting there looking at it. They could think a letter B is an 8 and run it wrong. This camera's the same thing. For that side of it. There's some limitations that kind of came with the Wellington ones as far as like your guys' unique ingress and egress in your town. By similar to Berthoud, there's a lot of major thoroughfares, they're CDOT controlled. So obviously CDOT has a longer permitting process that we're just waiting to see where that goes and obviously get those through. Some of the things we ran into too is just CDOT obviously denied them being on the traffic lights. Which kind of added in unique stuff for your guys' jurisdiction, is that obviously limited to what these cameras can capture. But we're hoping with some of the successes I talk about in the early onset of these that I can give you guys the most information that you can get. Yeah.
Do you have any, was there specific reason why CDOT declined to allow them on the traffic signals, or is that consistent everywhere that they don't allow that?
It's pretty consistent everywhere. Flock is still working as far as like their sales team, because their poles and everything are now CDOT crash test rated. And the Colorado State Patrol, obviously with Colorado being #1 in auto theft, is like, we want these. How do we get these through? We're not drilling holes in your pole. We're not doing, like, it basically just attaches with a ratchet strap on there. And then it's a solar and cellular to connect it. So we're not tapping anything. So that could change as it goes in. CDOT just routinely denies a lot of that stuff when it goes to their fixtures. It's just kind of like historically standard, if that
Okay.
makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
So it brought some unique challenges just due to where they're at. Obviously, we wanted to try and get as much vehicle traffic coming off of the interstate into those gas stations. And obviously, there were just unique challenges when it comes to power lines and stuff like that, that we're still working through. So some of the cameras aren't getting what we necessarily wanted, but that's just due to other circumstances of they didn't want to hit other utilities and cause you guys a bunch of issues and a whole wide range of stuff. But hopefully we can talk through that and we can go forward with those. So public transparency is super big with this company. So the reads in the database, i.e. photos of a vehicle, the license plate number, are only stored in that cloud database for 30 days. Once they're past that 30-day expiration, those plates are wiped from the system and no longer can get accessed anymore by anyone, by Flock, by law enforcement. That obviously changes that if we have a criminal case or we arrest a driver out of a stolen car off of it, we can download it and then that goes automatically into our evidence system and that's retained by us for different set amounts when it comes to court processes, whether it's a misdemeanor, a felony, a traffic offense, that kind of stuff. So that 30 days can get extended, but it's stored in an actual evidence system with us. This company also makes license plate that only read the rear of the car. So basically what that means is it can't be used for facial recognition. So that was one of this big part of this company is a civilian started it from a neighborhood that was crime ridden down in Texas, wanted to get as much info as they can, i.e. getting a plate to law enforcement to help solve crime. It didn't want it being used to target specific drivers, used for illegal use, right? It just eliminates that whole side of it when it focuses on the rear of the car. Deputies also receive training in the system, case law, and then other criminal state law, that kind of stuff, before they're given access to the system. And then it's monitored by like supervisors, internal affairs, and then a group of us that are kind of on the onboarding process, which is almost like every division. So there's a person in patrol, which is myself, up in our investigations, which is like our detective bureau, in our computer services. There's a guy that runs the state database that I'll talk about that basically that what we pull everything from if we're running names in our computers or running a plate and it's coming back saying it's stolen, that this guy basically maintains that system for the agency. So he's what's called a security officer, and he also has the ability to monitor that as well. To be able to go in and search in it, obviously deputies can get alerts as soon as a car drives by it and the system knows that it's stolen because it's comparing it to CCIC, which is Colorado Crime Information Center, and NCIC, which is the National Crime Information Center. So it's comparing that license plate to that database to be like, do we have a match? Is 1, 2, 3 ABC just past this camera? Oh, that's stolen. We're gonna automatically alert the deputy by popping up on the screen with a photo of the plate, photo of the car, and the location of the camera that it hit off of. So deputies can go interdict that, try and get that back, arrest that person on a warrant, get that kid back on an Amber Alert, things like that. To be able to search it for like any reason, deputies can go back in and search anything, obviously within that 30-day time frame when it comes to a criminal investigation, but they have to provide a case number and an incident number. That's auditable by the public, that's auditable by this company on what deputies are searching for, and that's monitored by our agency as well through numerous people in every division, and then our internal affairs has access to it to be able to look at that. Is obviously a free text field, so you technically could type anything into there for the search reason. That's just because every agency has different case number formats and they don't want to limit it to it. They're trying to make it as user friendly as they can. But if someone's putting in their like suspicious car, our internal affairs is going to see that, or a sergeant's going to see it, or a deputy's going to see it that's monitoring it and be like, nope, this isn't okay. That's not enough. We need things that can actually track back. Where if the public asks like, hey, this plate was ran in the criminal case, why was it run? We can go back and actually look at a case number or an incident and be like, this is exactly why. Not like, hey, it just says suspicious car. I don't know what to tell you. Just trying to give that public transparency to it. These are the current stats, agency-wide, and then I'll get a little bit into the Wellington ones. So the Berthoud ones came in late November, like the last week of November. We had 2 of them in the ground. So far, we've had 6 felony warrant arrests, 20 misdemeanor arrests, 7 stolen vehicles, totaling 100,000 plus in numerical value, monetary value of those, and 3 stolen plate recoveries. And this is countywide through all the cameras that are currently in the ground. Wellington right here, this is the only slide that's just different in your guys' packet because I wanted to make sure I got the data. So this is from March 6th to April 18th. Had 1 misdemeanor warrant arrest, 1 stolen vehicle recovery, 1 that deputies went to interdict and just couldn't locate. So that means it either turned on Cleveland, went down the interstate, jumped on a different road that no one was at, something like that. And then it was assisted in identifying a suspect vehicle from a burglary, which I'll talk about here in a little bit on how that progressed in your guys' town. And then actually, right when we were starting this meeting, a deputy was also going out to an alert off the camera in Wellington for another stolen car that rolled through and trying to locate that. So that's another one on there. These are the Berthoud ones, just to give you guys a time frame of how they've been here in Wellington and the kind of the extended one in Berthoud, if that makes sense. Just so you can kind of see how long these go in. So Berthoud's averaging right now 4 felony warrant arrests, 8 misdemeanors, 5 stolen vehicle recoveries in total, and then 2 stolen plate recoveries. That's from November 2023 to about March 1st, roughly 2023. We'll kind of get into some of the cases, right? Because that kind of what drives these things. And I think that's a good opportunity to kind of share the successes that we've had so far with these as we kind of go along. So in December of 2022, a 28-year-old male was arrested in a stolen vehicle that led deputies on a pursuit, which was safely ended near the Love's Travel Center, which is out near I-25. And then charges included, obviously, the pursuit. That male had 2 warrants, a revoked driver's license, which was a habitual traffic offender, which is the highest license restraint you can have in the state. And then he was DUI on drugs as well. So that was one of the first cases we had on it. In February 2022, 2 29-year-old males, 1 18-year-old female were contacted in a stolen vehicle in Johnstown. They also have these cameras and they're trialing them to see how they work for them as well. And it was involved in a shoplifting case out of the Shields sports goods store, whatever you want to call it. So those charges included obviously the stolen vehicle. They had drugs with them. One of the parties was unlawfully carrying a concealed weapon, different theft, and then one of the subjects had 5 warrants for their arrest as well. This to share you, so this demo includes the sheriff's office, but the other city jurisdictions are also part of this demo. They're just allowing the sheriff's office to take control of this, to be able to not have multiple demos running at once, just makes it easier on the company. So Fort Collins, Loveland, Windsor, anyone in our jurisdiction has access to this system through MOUs, and they follow the same stuff in their agency policies. So Fort Collins used it in February. They took a vehicle theft, and within a couple of minutes of taking that theft, jump on this system, which is just a web base, and we're able to see that the vehicle traveled to Orange County, Florida. They called Orange County, Florida, like, hey, our car traveled, it just passed one of your flock cameras. It's entered, but there's a time delay, and obviously the system downloading from the state and national system. So they called and said, hey, this just passed. Here's a copy of the vehicle entry. Can you guys go find this? And they were able to go find it and recover it and arrest the suspect, which obviously recovered that car way faster. Whereas before, without these, you may not have known that that car actually traveled to Florida, and it could be months down the road. The average vehicle recovery right now in Colorado is looking at about 6 months roughly to recover your car from date of stolen to actually recovering it. And some of those are years out too as well. So some more cases in Berthoud, they used it to ID suspects of a vehicle theft and a trailer theft. That was basically a camper that was stolen. Deputies used it to basically track the suspect vehicles that came into town, used other stuff like surveillance video to confirm like, yep, I think that's the truck. Now we have a license plate and now we identified a suspect. Whereas before, all they had is just a side profile of a white Ford F-250, which is super generic. And that would have been hard to find, and they actually tracked that guy down into the metro area. He just came up here to specifically do that and then steal that back. This has to be updated. It's been now used to assist 2 different agencies and 3 homicides now. One in Loveland, which was the one that recently happened at their apartment complex. It was used to help with that. And then 2 in Greeley as well for that side of it. In April, so pretty recently, this is a super big success. In the neighborhood where we have one of these cameras, one of the neighborhoods, we had a drive-by shooting that occurred. Deputies within 20 minutes were able to identify a suspect vehicle by using ring video footage doing a canvas and had a license plate. Within 2 hours, a suspect was identified that did that drive-by shooting and interviewed by our investigators and then taken into custody. Obviously, things happened after that to identify more of it. Now all of them are charged in there, and they're all unfortunately juveniles. But without that, even the victims are like, I don't think there's a way we would identify it. It's a white generic Ram truck, but this license plate caught it coming in right before the time of it, and then just using ring video footage or surveillance video in the neighborhoods to confirm that that was the car that we were looking for. Also in April, we used it to identify a home burglary suspect. So in the golf course, we were actually just talking about golf courts, but in that neighborhood, someone came in there, kicked in a door to a multi-million-dollar home and stole about $10,000 worth of construction tools. Fortunately, that guy had trackers on his tools, which is smart because it's happened to him before. Called us, said, hey, they're tracking in the metro area. We were able to get a plate for him and a photo of the truck, and then sent that down to our agencies down there to identify a suspect, and then they were able to help us out and identify that. So that case is still progressing, and there'll hopefully be a warrant here soon for that suspect for those crimes. Right at the institution, it was used to, I don't know if you guys remember, but the Amber Alert that came out of the metro area in like late December. Flock didn't catch that Amber Alert vehicle, but it was used to help the Loveland Police Department because it hit off of one of their license plate readers. And they're like, hey, we lost it. Did it go into Berthoud? The deputies were able to access the system, dump that plate into the system and be like, nope, it didn't come to Berthoud. So they were able to be like, all right, we lost it in this geographical area, flood this area with cops from every agency. And then they were able to find that car, arrest that suspect and get that, she's 13, get that 13-year-old girl back. In April, we used it in off of one of our Fort Collins cameras that hit out in our District 2 area, which is like LaPorte. That side to locate another Amber Alert. So it was a 3-year-old girl that was taken by her father, who wasn't allowed to have custody from her due to child custody stuff. That was trying to boogie out of state into Wyoming, and deputies were able to locate that car off of it by Pueblo calling us and saying, hey, we think this car's heading up the interstate. A deputy jumped on here, dumped the plate into the system, and is like, oh, there it is. And we went and found it, and they were able to get that 3-year-old girl back, and then the father into custody for obviously the charges of taking her against that side of it and kidnapping and stuff like that. The Wellington, the one I touched on, was able to use identify a suspect vehicle from a store burglary here in town. It didn't catch the temp tag just due to the lighting conditions. Cameras are susceptible to everything, right? Like the naked eye with snow or lighting conditions, I could think the plate's different than what I thought. This camera is the same way. Though it didn't catch it, deputies were able to download that photo and send it out to the guys working here in your community. And a deputy that was good at doing his job was able to pull that photo up and be like, hey, I think this is the car sitting here over off a side street. A couple days later, pulled that photo up and is like, yep, it has a unique license plate bracket. The sticker's in a certain spot. Waited for cover, identified that vehicle, which identified a suspect when they contacted him in it, and that progressed that case along. I don't know the status of it just because it's still active, but that male was looking at being the primary suspect of that burglary that happened here in town. Reviewing video footage too from that case, just before I came here, the car parked right off of 6th Street and then walked into the business, did the burglary and walked back. So even their security cameras just see a guy walking up that's wearing a face mask. You don't really catch anything. So this plate reader was very helpful in actually catching a photo of that car. The deputies could start looking at that even though it didn't actually catch the plate. And they tried a bunch of different combinations of that temp tag and it just didn't make out, but enough was there for them to be able to contact this stuff. Again, used in Berthoud to contact a stolen vehicle. That suspect was involved in a motor vehicle theft ring. It was operating in Larimer County. Weld County, so Greeley, and then all over in the metro area where there's about 50 different suspects tied to that one ring for it. So that helped identify him. Deputies were involved in a pursuit in that and let that go just for public safety due to daytime hours, but having that photo, passing it to our investigators and then to the auto theft task force, they were able to use that to kind of track where that car was and who this guy was as they came around. And then most recently, I'm sure you guys saw it, but the senior alert that we did a couple weeks ago out of Berthoud, where we had a 93-year-old man that went missing. I was the primary deputy that took that case. As soon as the wife called in and I talked to her, I was like, what's going on? And she's like, my husband has early onset dementia. He was supposed to be home at 1:10. It's now 3:30. I confirmed with the friend that he left the Loveland Library and I don't know where he went. I jumped out the system right away, plugged his plate in, saw he entered Berthoud, but still didn't make it home. And then we used this company to track the other agencies that have this, basically track his car around the state. So we tracked him down to Lyons, who has these cameras, down to Jeffco. And then obviously there's not a ton of this company yet around there. He bounced around gas stations and ended up in Winter Park is where he finally got located when he crashed his car.
He
in
was
the
on
police
vacation.
department. Yeah, exactly. But it was pretty vital just to tell the wife that, hey, he was southbound on Berthoud Parkway. I know you already told me his route. Is this different than him? She's like, yeah, there's no way he'd be taking that route. That's way off character for him. I don't know what he's doing. And that helped us at least identify it, but then also get a photo of the car to send out to other agencies and be like, hey, look for this, using our press release to give to citizens. This is the actual car instead of just, here's the stock vehicle photo of it, right? We actually showed it, had stickers on it, things like that, that even lay citizens can look at and be like, oh, I think that's that dude, and call in as it kind of goes in. So let's see if this goes through. So this is a dashboard that we kind of created that'll give you guys a kind of idea of it. So right now, these are kind of where all the cameras are at. So obviously,
Showing that screen right now.
let's see.
Might need to unshare and then share the other screen.
There we go. So this right here is just showing where the cameras are at. That's what this green blob is. So these ones right here are the ones in Johnstown that they're testing over on the Larimer side. Obviously a bunch in Berthoud, a couple in Timnath, some out here in our district in East Fort Collins, up in LaPorte, and then your guys' is one up here in Wellington, and then one up here in Livermore. But basically this kind of gives you an idea. So in total, from the start of this program to now, we've averaged about 2,000, a little over 2,000 hits off of it. And basically this kind of shows you a graph of what it's hitting off of. So roughly a little under 50% is stolen plates. Misdemeanor warrants is the next biggest one. Attempt to locates, which just basically means the agency enters that plate in that we're looking for it for a burglary, homicide, whatever it is, hit and run. Stolen vehicle, and then felony warrants and some other things as it goes in. So that kind of just gives you an idea. Kind of give you guys an idea. These ones right here, obviously the ones in Berthoud are up very high traffic roads. So Berthoud Parkway, northbound and southbound, they're not on 287 just because we're waiting for that approval through CDOT. But those obviously are hitting a lot off of it, where we're getting a ton of success is just that traffic volume as it goes through. And then the ones in Timnath are also progressing as it goes through. But that kind of just gives you an idea. And those numbers right there, how many hot hits it's getting on that plate. So this Berthoud camera has about 231 of them so far from the start of this trial till now of it basically hitting on something, whether it's stolen plates, warrants, stolen vehicles, that kind of stuff. And this is still changing, but hopefully the idea of this is to have a dashboard that you guys could have access to, and then you get real-time updates of how this program is progressing as it goes in. It's still just in the works, and I just wanted to make sure that you guys specifically saw that. Jump back here to the PowerPoint. So Castle Rock was the guinea pig, and I don't think I'd be giving you guys the whole experience of this company without talking about some of their successes. So they were the first agency that partnered with this company. They have about 38 cameras right now. And the next jurisdictions that are closest to us is the city of Boulder has about 40 of them. And then the little tiny towns around it. So like Erie, Lafayette, that kind of side. Johnstown and us are the next closest up here that are running demos for this. As we kind of go along. And so it's kind of hard to see in this, but I'll kind of give you an idea. So they basically got a hit on a stolen truck that was coming through. They chose to follow it, wait for it to pull into a Sonic right here and then interdict that car where it had an opportunity that it couldn't run. It was stuck in a spot. They could park behind it and we didn't get into a pursuit where we're endangering citizens or anything like that. So that's primarily what deputies are taught as well with us, is not be the dog chasing the rabbit, right? To try and keep eyes on it and get it to bed down in a parking lot or where we can interdict this safely, or hopefully have a deputy get in front of it with spike strips that if it does run, it's just immediately stopped or immediately deflate the tires where those speeds go down in those pursuits, and we can take other action, and we're not doing like 130 down a roadway, endangering people as we go on. But this stopped the occupants in the vehicle in total had about 27 warrants for their arrest. So that's 27 cases that got progressed in the court case. This right here is pretty recent. Castle Rock was emailing me about this, but it's about 10 pounds of methamphetamine that they located out of the car. And their goal is just to tell their public that, yep, we have these, but it's also not used to locate stolen cars. This is also getting us on like a traffic warrant that maybe is attached to a plate. Now we're pulling things like guns, high value dollar drugs out of the car, that kind of stuff to keep the community safe that way. Whereas before, unless you had a deputy sitting there running every plate on the corner, you're not going to have it. That camera is basically just sitting there running plates as much as it can as it passes by. And these are some of the obviously fruits of those traffic stops that they're getting off of it. And they've had great success with their stolen vehicles. Johnstown so far has averaged about 12 stolen vehicle recoveries in the 3 months that they've had their cameras. So they're kind of progressing. This was another case that they shared with me that obviously had a couple sawed-off shotgun, some handguns that were with the felon, and then these right here are all fentanyl pills that are disguised as oxy. As it kind of comes along. So obviously producing some good results that we don't want this stuff floating in the community, but it's also there that deputies could just ignore it. And then when it starts dinging in their face that, hey, this stolen car just drove by, now we can get alerted to it instead of deputies doing the old way, which is trying to pick it up proactively, which we're good at, but obviously we can't be everywhere at once. So obviously I kind of want to end it with question and answers. I'm here to answer whatever questions you guys have about this program here. Obviously the Wellington stats, when you look at them, aren't as successful, if you will, as some of the other areas. And I think that's just due to the time frame. So even when we started in Berthoud, we maybe got a couple alerts here and there, but it's like traffic increased, weather got nicer, more people are out driving around, that kind of extends for that side of it. We're starting to see the success over it. And obviously the success using it in criminal investigations when we need to try and identify a plate of a suspect car or things like that as we come and go along. So I'm here to answer whatever questions that you guys have on these, just to give you guys a better idea.
I do. So when you go into a community and you kind of look around and look at where cameras are needed, do you guys have like a guesstimate number for each community that you go into on how many you want to see set up in that community to be most beneficial and assistive?
Yep, so the goal when these basically got started is, especially in the two towns that we police, which is Berthoud and Wellington, is to try and get major ingress and egress roads. Berthoud wanted a little bit more just because they wanted to see if those neighborhoods would buy these cameras, because they came to us specifically when they heard about it and expressed interest. So this company's like, yep, we'll give you as many cameras as you want for this demo. And the demo is 60 days. That clock has not started yet because at the beginning, and I'll give this to this company right now, they're losing money on us because they're eating the cost of these cameras every day that they're in the ground, even over a year. And obviously we'll approach that pretty close. But they said, hey, these cameras will start the 60-day clock once all 54 of them are in the ground, and we're still waiting on 26 of them to go in the ground. So obviously we're getting these for a lot longer period, which benefits us and it benefits the citizens of our community to use these. But that company also shows their drive to be able to solve crime in communities by saying, hey, we promised you this, we're going to go. But yes, we looked at basically hot zone areas in the towns, in the jurisdiction of where can these cameras be best. In the city of Fort Collins, Loveland, they were running different ALPR or license plate reader systems that we basically looked at where are those at and where can we put these to maybe complement those or give them a better idea. So that's kind of the general idea of it. That's kind of where they went, is just looking at hot zone areas and trying to get the biggest flow of traffic as it came through. So most of the ones in Wellington that we're waiting for are like Highway 1, right off the interstate, that kind of stuff to catch all that, which are like CDOT controlled roadways, and that's kind of where those are not in yet, is it's just waiting that permitting process as we kind of go along for that.
Would you say this is like having an additional officer by your side when you're not available?
Yeah,
Like, I don't mean to negate a
Yeah.
computer compared to our officers that serve, but kind of looking at it as $2,500 per camera or $76,000 per like deputy that comes into the community. So that's kind of one of those things that you see such a cost benefit.
Right.
Not just on a budget side for as far as the town goes, but also in the community side. Because I mean, the drugs and items that you showed here, just. That's one less pill that's sitting on our street right now. I
right.
guess is probably the best way that I look at that.
For sure, these license plate readers are basically like having a cop park at the intersection and sitting there hand running every license plate that passes them, which obviously isn't possible because we're gonna look there and look at it, but this computer can start looking at it and going through. The other opportunity that this camera has is something that deputies don't, is that it has AI technology in it, so artificial intelligence, that they teach it what new cars look like. So what does the new Chevy Silverado look like? Where do they put that logo? Where's that license plate? What do out-of-state license plates look like? What does a temp tag in Colorado look like to a temp tag in Wyoming? They're constantly teaching the computer how to learn what that looks like, which gives deputies the ability to go in the system, even if they take their plates off their car, to be like, we're looking for a white Chevy sedan. And we are like, oh, we got it on video footage. There's a sticker on the back. Deputies have the ability through the system to input things like window stickers, top rack, back rack, stuff that they teach this camera what to look for, that they can go back and run it to plate readers nationwide through this company. So all over the United States, that hopefully they drove by a camera at one point, not doing their criminal episode, and they actually have their license plate on there and they're able to go back and track it. So there's a lot of like on the back end success to it, but also that success that you brought up of it's basically like a deputy except cheaper, sitting it there. To give you guys an idea, old legacy ALPRs, which is what the industry refers to, other ones that work a little bit different than this company's, take photos of everything, whether it's coming straight on like a front facing photo, rear facing photo, and it's a majority off infrared. And it just goes off license plate info, so it can't tell that that license plate is on a Chevy sedan, but that plate actually goes to a Jeep. It's just gonna say, nope, the Chevy sedan's a Jeep because it's pulling that plate information from the DMV. This company uses the plate secondary to what it teaches the computer to look like. And those ones cost roughly, Loveland just paid for theirs. It's a little under 30,000 just for the camera unit. That is only, at least in my experience, good as far as maintenance for about 3 years. And then you're hit or miss whether they say, yep, we have parts to replace it, or nope, you gotta buy our new stuff now. Where this company paying the subscription fee, if you will, every year looks cost ineffective, but like what you get out of it seems to be better as far as like at Berthoud right now, one camera is giving us issues. We called them up because it had a red tint to it. The tech came out the next day, swapped that camera out, put it in there, but it didn't cost us anything. Even if we were paying for it, that's part of that $2,500 cost that kind of goes into it.
Awesome. I like it because it kind of protects people's privacy as well.
For sure.
You said those ones that Loveland installed will take pictures all over,
Yep. just taking
where the
photos of
block one
everything.
only takes the picture of the car or the reverse of that license plate on the rear end.
And that
So
was a
it's a
goal,
privacy
obviously,
thing.
when looking at like what companies to go to. I've ran different license plate reader companies, and then looking at this one, it had some more advantages that were more community oriented than other ones that they sell to public entities if they want to. If Walmart wants to pay for this camera to help with their shoplifting, that gives Walmart more incentive to help us by helping themselves, right? But then we get access to that camera if they're like, yes, we want to share with the sheriff's office or our local police department, and they get alerts no different, so that it's kind of a win-win for them. But other companies don't do that where they sell to private entities, and they certainly don't have the privacy side of it, because the sheriff's office has no interest in tracking citizens' movements. The only interest that we have is public safety, right? As we come into this, and this company seems to blend those lines to where we felt comfortable being like, can we try this demo? Is this going to be successful for citizens in our community? And the end goal of our goal, which is providing public safety.
Awesome.
An interesting point that you brought up, that is a cool byproduct of this particular program, is that it provides traffic counts essentially for us. So those, it'll help us be able to monitor maybe some of those traffic counts during like our events and things, so that we don't have to have those measurement systems out there. A side note, overreaching government always causes a little bit of uncomfortable feeling. So, I mean, I see both sides of it. From your perspective, I guess.
And this is AI, immediate, real time, correct?
Correct, yeah.
So if you got somebody coming across into our parking lot over here and they're wanted for drugs, it's gonna be automatically sent to the local police department.
Yep, there's a little bit of delay just because it's got to check the system and then dump it out. So it's about 20 to 30 seconds. But you're getting that alert in about 30 seconds on the long end. We're
Right,
seeing the shorter end of that if that's entered in there, where deputies are automatically getting a photo of it. But then they have to take certain steps. We're not just gonna light that car up or start pointing guns because the camera says it's stolen. We obviously got to look at it and compare, does the plate match that entry? Did someone not call in that their stolen plates got recovered? Things like that, that obviously you've seen in the news, right? Metro area agencies and example, recently that hot stopped a car that ALPR actually said, yep, that's a stolen car. But it was saying that that was a different state plate that was for a motorcycle, and they stopped a family that's in an SUV. So deputies are trained how to like obviously prevent that, which is that we need to verify. It's no different than someone saying, hey, my neighbor Johnny killed his wife Susie. We're not gonna go straight arrest him, right? We're gonna verify that information, and these license plate readers are the same thing as that. We're gonna start taking steps to verify that that is correct, visually confirming it and running it again ourselves to be like, does this match, before we start taking enforcement action on it.
So I think I appreciate that seeing results is good to see that. I do share some of Mayor Pro Tem's concerns with privacy. I mean, this is constantly the thing that we go through, right? We give up this amount of privacy at the airport because of certain things that happen. My understanding, and so I want to preface that my concerns are not with what it sounds like a company now and how LCSO is going to use it. I appreciate how you guys are using it. The concern is that if we have other entities that choose to use it in different ways in future, can that cause problems that we have to take into account? Because it's like my understanding is there are different lists that can be entered, that you get alerts based on certain lists that are in there. So for felony warrants, there's one list. For misdemeanor warrants, there's another list. For stolen vehicles, there's another list. Do we get to some point in the future? Again, doesn't sound like it happened with this company or LCSO is going to do this, but you get to like, oh, these are political miscreants. There's now this list, and I just want to be careful. But again, the entities we're working with now, I think it's not a problem, but I think it's a question we've got to look at seriously. Like, again, we're saying we as government, yes, we're not capturing faces and things like that, but we are still, that information is there and we're tracking it. Are we making sure that it's being used responsibly?
And I think that's where you get that the company can obviously audit it, and then we have the ability to audit it. So anytime deputy makes a custom list, if they're looking for a burglary suspect and it's maybe not in that system, but they want to know if that car passes a camera again, that list is automatically, as soon as they enter it, they have to enter a case number. They can't just enter it. And several people up several different chains have access that as soon as that goes in, we're seeing that list on there to be like, why is this deputy creating that? And then we have the ability to be like, that doesn't look okay, delete as admins, and that list goes away. And then we go have a conversation like, what's going on here for that side of it. So a lot of it's obviously internal trust, which I think the sheriff's office has built the reputation to do that, but
Agreed.
we also want that citizen buyback and the buyback from you guys to hold that accountable, right? Some agencies, right, don't fight for the job of their law enforcement policing their areas, where the sheriff's office is unique, right? Every day the deputies in a contract town, and we tell our guys in Bertha the same thing as this, is that we're competing for our business, right? Where basically, if you guys don't like it, you can be like, nope, we're starting our own. We don't like how you guys do business. Every day deputies are fighting to keep that business through it. So I think that accountability goes both ways, and we welcome that for that side of it. And that's why we want to come to these meetings and offer input to anyone that wants. At the end of it, we'll go to the county commissioners as well and kind of talk about successes, that kind of stuff, as we kind of go along. And it's not a secret that we're doing this. We're more than happy to answer questions to citizens or anything like that. So I welcome any feedback that you guys have, and thank you for the questions, because that accountability back to us is what kind of makes the community a whole, right? We wouldn't have the police department or sheriff's department or any law enforcement without actually having community buy-in and trust. If that gets broken down, then what are we doing here, right? We're not going to be successful in our end goal for that side of it.
I will say you have a lot of SaaS. If you're looking at this as a customer business relationship, you have many customers that are very satisfied with the service LCSO provides here in our community. I hear it on a very regular basis.
I'm glad.
Yeah, excellent presentation, Deputy. Really appreciate it. So lots of successes here, and very good stuff. So.
Thanks, good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
At some point, if we have a discussion about the community impact deputy again and future law enforcement, can we have him here for that? I like it. I'm not saying we're gonna steal him from Berthoud, but I think he could really. I approve. Don't tell the Berthoud mayor. No, but I would love to have, if you were able to get you back out here when we have that conversation, because I mean, just hearing that you're kind of running a lot of this, I'd love to kind of hear what that looks like. Is that's one of the things we're exploring, is do we put in place a similar position here in Wellington?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to come back on whatever issue it is. If you guys want Berthoud specific stuff to help make decisions on whatever you guys have. I know the town staff down there is more than happy. We've traveled to other towns to provide our input of what we're doing. They're more than happy on the administrative side, whether it's policy or anything like that, to share. And we're more than happy on our side of it to come in and offer anything that we can and give you guys input as you're looking to progress those options and progress as a community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Next item is going to be the monthly utility report. Mr. Gowan.
Just send him the panelist, so he should be popping up here in a second. How are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
It's been a while since I fussed around with these settings, so bear with me just a second.
It's funny how something that was a norm that you just, when you don't use it after a while, like, how do I make my camera come on?
Well, we tend to use Teams more than,
It's different.
yeah. So I am trying to share my screen here.
We can see your screen.
What do you see the agenda item, the utility report?
Yes.
Yeah, it's like.
Could you make it bigger? Yeah.
I can make it. Does that help?
There it is. Yep, it's full screen now.
Okay. So this is the monthly utility report that we've been providing since last summer. This was kind of an upgraded version of our previous reports that we would send in on a periodic basis. Thought we would kind of present it in this format to see if there's any questions out there. There's a lot of technical information in here, so I'm going to run through this pretty fast. Please feel free to ask questions as we go or at the end, either way. So the monthly utility report, it basically consists of 3 parts. There's a production and operational summary, which is this page that we're looking at. And there's the production graphs, as we call them, that are actually on the back of the report. And in between are fairly detailed reports on the expansion projects themselves and the status of those reports. So I'll go through this one pretty quickly. A lot of this is also located on the production graphs that are at the end, and I think some of it might be a little bit easier to grasp in there. So we'll get to that here later on. But for the water side, our production was 19 million gallons for the last month. And that's about average, maybe a little less than average for the last 5 years. Generally speaking, we present the last 5 years in our production graphs, as you probably noticed. On the wastewater side, we're at about 61% of our maximum permitted hydraulic capacity. Our bugaboo and our challenge out there has always been organic loading, organic capacity, and we're currently at 80%, which is a fairly good number. We've been higher than that in past months. So feeling pretty good so far this year, but things can change in a hurry, as we know. The operational summary, kind of the bottom part of this report. I think the highlights here are that we spent some time at the water plant kind of tuning things up in anticipation of summer demand. So we've got the 40 horsepower, which is our workhorse raw water pump, up and running, and that's ready to go. We needed to turn that off during the winter because of low demand. This is our highest capacity pump that we have at our pre-treat facility for raw water pumping. The nanofiltration plant was taken down for really a range of operational and maintenance related improvements. Those included things like replacement of a pump motor. We rebuilt our chemical dosing system, and also kind of implemented some safety improvements in terms of containment and things like that. So the water plant crew spent some quality time out at the nano, making sure that that plant was up and running at top form for peak demand. Our microfiltration plant is we still haven't turned that on. And as y'all might recall, that particular process does nothing for taste and odor treatment, and it's located out at Reservoir 3. So that's kind of our last case. That's our third option in terms of turning on production capacity. And we haven't needed to use that. So we haven't. When we do, if we get into a situation, say in the summer, where we've got to turn on the micro, then there will be a corresponding impact to taste and odor, and we'll be sure and get that information out to everybody as that's happening. The water reclamation plant is cranking along, and you'll see the primary update there, which is pretty common update for all the water wastewater staff. Continue to coordinate with the expansion project contractor daily. And when I say daily, I really mean by minute. There's so much stuff going on out there. The operators are constantly working through the phasing issues and access and storage issues just on a daily basis, in addition to keeping their eye, along with our project managers, Dave and Nathan, on the projects. So the next section are the project status reports. The first one here is for the water treatment plant expansion, and we're still generally on track for the schedule. We have experienced a few weather days. It's our belief that we'll be able to make that up later on in the project, but we are tracking those weather days. Those are basically days that, due to high winds or precipitation, whether it's snow or rain, just basically the contractor can't work on that day. And we have had a lot of wind out there this past year, and that's a safety issue that we just, it's just not safe to operate a crane or do some things in that kind of wind. Recently, we've started on the chemical building. We've got the slab complete and we're going vertical on that. So if you drive by, you'll start to see some rebar sticking up out of the chemical plant building. Flipping over to the wastewater plant. Well, in terms of contingency, so we include this contingency update, and just as a reminder, we had about $3 million in total contingency on the water plant. We report the changes in that month, but I did want to kind of give you the overall status of the contingency. Between the owner and the contractor contingency, we're at 89% remaining. And we're, well, I should say roughly halfway through the project. So we're feeling pretty good about the contingency. It's important to note too that some of these months you'll see that we have negative change orders, negative changes to the project that are basically a result of our continuing value engineering efforts, which are kind of foremost in the whole team's mind on an ongoing basis out there. So moving to the wastewater or water reclamation, status report. We're still on track from a schedule point of view there. We've got a few weather delays that, again, we hope to make up later. We are under construction with all the facilities out there, and there's quite a few of them. There's more facilities out at the wastewater plant, and by facilities, I mean irrigation basins or buildings, or generally all those big concrete structures that you see out there. So here's the list of all the facilities that are in process and kind of the monthly what's happened in the last month. In terms of contingency for the water reclamation plant, again, there's some details there, but in the overall sense, the total combined contingency, we have about 80% remaining on that contingency. So feeling pretty good about that one. This project is a little bit further along. It's a bigger project. They've just got more people out there working, and it's a little bit further along than the water treatment plant. This last part are the production graphs, which we've been producing these for years. And I hope that people are interested in them. They fascinate us. But this purple is the total production for the month this year. There's the legend right there. And you can see our production is tracking along at a slightly below average rate. And that's a good thing. Obviously, it's the summer months that are problematic for us in terms of meeting demand. That 2020, those 2020 bars just pop out as really almost kind of just a difference. They're on a different level there. But if you look at the rest of the bars, you can see that in general, there's just been a very slight decrease in demand over the last 5 years, excluding 2020, which I think we could attribute to a number of things. But in general, that's probably an example of effective water conservation. So we're at 56 million gallons total production for the first quarter, and that's 171 acre feet. The rest of these charts on the water side are just detail. This is broken out by the two processes we have at the main plant site. These numbers are of some interest, but this one right here is for the nano plant. And you can see that it's been a little bit inconsistent starting out the year because we have had to take it down. We've also had some our selenium discharge issues at the wastewater plant. Most of that comes from the nano plant. So we've got testing going on there, and that's kind of complicated our production at the nano plant as well. So here's the water reclamation charts. This is the total monthly volume of influent flow into the plant. And we had a high number in January, and we have more like an average number of February and March. These numbers tend to be a little bit more volatile than you would expect. But that's what we get at the wastewater plant. You can see it's a total of 55 million gallons treated. And that equates to 168 acre feet. Our primary, this is a chart about hydraulic loading, and some of you may recall that we have two primary criteria. One is hydraulic loading, which is just the amount of wastewater that comes into the plant. And this chart kind of shows you over the years how we've are performing against our limits, our design limits for the plant itself, and really our permit limits. And you can see that we've bumped it a few times, and again, those were 2020 numbers. And but this year we're tracking along pretty well. We're at 61% for the month of March. Our challenge out there is typically going to be organic loading, which is just the amount of, some people think of it as the strength of the wastewater stream. You could also just think of it as just the amount of organic material that we have to treat in order to safely release it to the environment. And this is our limit, this dashed line right here over the years. And you can see that we're tracking along this cyan line at about 80% of our maximum organic loading. And that's the report. So if there's any questions or comments, we'd love to try and address those.
Like start off by saying, Bob, you're doing great. It's a great report.
Well, I have to admit, I don't actually put this report together. I have to give credit to Nathan Ewert and Dave Meyer on that one.
You did a heck of a job.
Yeah.
So, thank you. Anybody got questions, comments?
Yeah, the report again, as the mayor said, was great. You actually answered one of my questions, which was where we're at on the total contingency for water. Where are we at on the contingency with the sewer?
We're at about 80% for the sewer.
8%, okay.
80% remaining.
8% remaining, okay,
Yeah.
perfect. And I appreciate, I know I've beat this through the whole process, and I appreciate you guys saving money on things as we go through the process. I sometimes wish the credits and the debits were flipped. And we were saving the bigger numbers and spending the smaller ones, but I appreciate the work you guys are doing to keep on top of that. So good work, keep it up.
Thank you.
Really good, clear, concise information. It doesn't answers all the questions. It's really, really good report. And I like that you can do the trends over time too. That's super helpful.
What it is, I know, and this report, as you mentioned, does get put into your packet, but I wanted to make sure we drew attention to it. I felt like we were at a good place at the construction of the facilities and things like that to just provide a good update and go through it. And we'll probably do this again in the fall.
Awesome. Thank you for putting that in.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bob.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
Hey,
And thank you, Nathan.
Yeah,
Alright.
Nathan, Dave, I'll tell them.
Megan, it's a team effort.
Yeah, it really is.
All in favor of ending the work session.
Hi.
Cool, nighty night.